Unknown user. Welcome to the first paradoxes. Let's start with a simple yet mind-bending question. What if the more you trust your own mind, the more likely it is that you're wrong? Gaslighting is the art of breaking reality while pretending it's still whole. It's not just lying, it's lying in a way that makes you question whether the truth was ever real in the first place. And here's the paradox. The better it works, the more invisible it becomes. The more effective the gaslighter, the less you believe they exist. You become your own gaslighter without realizing it. Now hold on. How can someone control your mind using your own mind against you? That's where it gets twisted. A person tells you something didn't happen. You know it did. But they insist, calmly, repeatedly. Maybe they even smile. They ask if you're feeling okay. They ask if you're tired, if you might have mixed things up. Not to harm you, oh no. They're just concerned. You start to doubt, just a flicker. But flickers can become fires. Because here's the loop. The more you second-guess your memory, the more you look to others for confirmation. And the more you do that, the more power they have over what's real for you. That's the core paradox of gaslighting. The victim begins to doubt not only what's true, but the fact that truth can be known. You no longer argue with the gaslighter, you argue with yourself. The gaslighter can go silent. They've already infected your mind. Now look at this. Gaslighting only works when the victim is sane. If someone truly was irrational, unstable, or delusional, it wouldn't matter what the gaslighter said. But because the victim is clear-headed and logical, they keep trying to make sense of what's happening. They try to reconcile what they saw with what they're being told. In other words, the smarter you are, the more vulnerable you become. That's the paradox. Intelligence doesn't protect you. It helps destroy you faster because your brain starts helping the gaslighter. A lie told once is just a lie, but a lie told again and again, paired with the right tone, a steady gaze, a little feigned concern, becomes something stranger. It becomes doubt. The paradox is that certainty gets weaker the more it's challenged, not by stronger evidence, but by calmer denial. Someone says, "That didn't happen." You say, "Yes, it did." They shake their head gently. "Are you sure?" they ask. You say, "I remember it." They say, "You've been stressed lately, haven't you?" Now you're not defending a memory. You're defending your sanity. Truth is supposed to be strong, but gaslighting shows truth is fragile. You thought truth was hard like steel, but it's soft like smoke. It can be bent and reshaped by nothing more than confidence. That's what makes gaslighting work. It doesn't erase reality. It just asks you to doubt it. That's all it takes. And here's another paradox. The more someone gaslights you, the more you feel guilty. You feel like you're the one doing harm by insisting something happened. You start to apologize. You start to soften your words. You start to say, "Maybe I misunderstood," even though deep down, you didn't. You bend not because you're wrong, but because you're tired. That's the twist. Truth doesn't break with force. It breaks with exhaustion. It gets worse. If someone tells you something false and you catch it, you feel strong. You say, "That's not true." But if they respond by acting like they're hurt, like you are being unkind, now you're the villain for protecting reality. The paradox is that you defend truth and end up feeling cruel for doing it. You tell someone, "That happened," and they say, "Why are you being so hostile?" Now you're explaining your tone, not the event. The focus has shifted. You're off balance. The truth is buried, not in lies, but in emotions. And here's where it flips entirely. You can start gaslighting yourself without anyone in the room. You walk into a moment of confusion and automatically assume it's your fault. You forget where you place something and instantly think, "I'm losing it." You feel upset and immediately tell yourself you're overreacting. Not because it's true, but because that pattern has been carved into your mind. You no longer need the gaslighter. Their voice has become your own. How can something be both invisible and destructive? How can something so simple, denying a fact, cause someone to feel like they're falling apart? That's the gaslighting paradox. The less you notice it, the more it works. The more you resist it, the guiltier you feel. The more you fight it, the more you're blamed. Reality becomes something you can't touch, but are still punished for not understanding. Gaslighting doesn't work with force. It works with softness. Not screaming, but whispering. Not fists, but sighs. And that's what makes it harder to see. We expect deception to come dressed in malice, but gaslighting wears a calm face, a kind tone, a gentle shrug. It pretends to be your friend. It says it's helping you. That's the trick. That's why you let it in. And once it's in, you stop defending the truth. You start defending your mental stability. That's the cruelest part. The paradox is that you no longer care what happened. You just want to believe you're not broken. You abandon truth not because you don't believe in it, but because you're afraid believing in it will isolate you. You give it up to stay connected. You give it up to feel safe. But now think about this. What if they believe their lies too? What if the gaslighter isn't manipulating you consciously? What if they've gaslit themselves? What if their version of reality is so deeply twisted that when they deny the truth, they're not lying? They're confused? Now the paradox deepens. You might be gaslit by someone who's also a victim. The abuser doesn't know they're doing harm. They think they're right. They think you're the one who's slipping. So who do you believe? Them? Yourself? Neither? Gaslighting exposes the instability of truth, not because truth is weak, but because our connection to it is fragile. It shows us that memory isn't solid, that confidence isn't proof, that feeling sure is no guarantee of being right. And in that fragile space, all it takes is a little doubt to bring the whole structure down. It makes you wonder how much of what you know is only because no one has challenged it yet. And if they did, would you still believe it? Would you fight for it? Or would you fold? That's the real paradox. You might never know when you're being gaslit. You might never know when you're gaslighting yourself. And the scariest part is, if it's done right, you won't even think to ask. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about being loved so much, it ends up not being love at all. Love bombing is when someone showers you with affection, attention, and praise, not to love you, but to own you. It feels like the beginning of a fairy tale, but it's the setup to a trap. And here's the paradox. The more someone gives you, the more they can take away. The more adored you feel, the more hollow you become. You think you're being lifted up, but your feet are slowly being taken off the ground until you're floating, weightless, dependent, and afraid to fall. It begins with intensity, messages, compliments, gifts, time, touch, promises. You feel chosen, special, seen. But the paradox is this: if love is real, it grows slowly. It takes time to understand, to connect, to trust. Love bombing skips all that. It feels fast because it isn't love. It's strategy. You're overwhelmed, not because they know you, but because they don't need to. You're not the target because of who you are. You're the target because you're there. It sounds like care, but it's calculation. That's the twist. They say everything you want to hear, and because it feels good, you stop questioning it. Your walls come down fast. That's what they want. Not your heart, your surrender. The more they flood you with praise, the more your inner voice goes quiet. The more they affirm you, the less you trust your own thoughts. You begin to rely on their love to feel real. That's where the paradox cuts in. You're being given so much that you stop noticing you're losing yourself. You believe it's love because it looks like love. But real love respects space. This kind rushes in like a wave, not to wash over you, but to sweep you away. The paradox is that the more perfect it feels, the more dangerous it is. When someone mirrors your dreams, finishes your sentences, tells you you're their soulmate after 3 days, it doesn't mean they see you. It means they're trying to become everything to you. Fast, before you can think, before you can ask. And then, once you're hooked, they change. That's how the paradox unfolds. The one who praised you suddenly withdraws. The messages slow down. The warmth fades. The compliments stop. And now you panic. Not because you did something wrong, but because they trained you to need their attention to feel okay. You chase what they once gave freely. You bend to get it back. You try harder, not realizing this was the goal all along. That's the cruel part. You think you're in love, but really, you've been conditioned. Conditioned to crave their approval. Conditioned to fear their silence. Conditioned to feel that losing them means losing everything. And yet, you were never really loved. That's the paradox. You're emotionally addicted to something that never existed. You were lifted up just to fall harder. That's what makes it so confusing. Because you can't tell where the love ends and the control begins. You remember how amazing it felt, how they looked at you, what they said. So when things go cold, you blame yourself. You think, what did I do wrong? But you didn't do anything. You were just part of a pattern. Now here's the strangest part. They might not even know they're doing it. They might believe the rush of attention they gave you was real. They might think they did love you in the beginning. But love that only lasts until you start thinking for yourself isn't love. It's manipulation in disguise. The paradox is that both people might believe they're in something beautiful, while one of them is being emotionally dismantled. And it gets darker. The person who love-bombed you might use that first phase as proof. They'll say, but I gave you everything. I treated you like royalty. No one will ever love you like I did. And they're right, no one should. But you start to believe them. You start to think you'll never feel that way again. And that's true too, because that feeling wasn't real. That intensity wasn't sustainable. It wasn't built on truth. It was built to break you. And still, you miss it. That's the trap. The paradox is that even when you know it was a game, you long for the moments when it felt like magic. You don't miss the person. You miss how they made you feel. You chase the memory of an illusion, and that keeps you stuck, trying to revive something that only existed to pull you in. They may even punish you with silence, with distance, with disapproval, and it hurts more than it should. Not because you're weak, but because you were rewired to think their love equals your worth. That's the brutal logic. The love you were given wasn't a gift. It was bait. And yet, part of you still wonders, what if it was real? That's the deepest paradox of all. You doubt your instincts. You replay everything. You try to separate truth from performance. But love bombing mixes the two so well that even when you escape it, you carry the confusion. You hesitate to trust future love. You question whether love is ever real. And sometimes you even blame yourself for falling for it. But that's the final paradox. The fact that you fell for it proves your heart was open, that you believed in goodness, that you wanted connection. The problem wasn't your love. It was how it was used against you. Love bombing isn't just about being fooled. It's about how something that feels like everything can become nothing. It's about how giving can be a form of taking, how flattery can be a weapon, how passion can be control-wearing perfume. And maybe the most painful truth is this: the person who love-bombed you doesn't need to be cruel. They just need to be empty, because people who are empty will fill you up quickly, not to share love, but to feel full themselves. And when they drain you dry, they move on, not because you're unworthy, but because they never stayed for you. They stayed for the high. So here you are, left with echoes of a love that was louder than life and quieter than truth, a love that shouted your name only to disappear when you called it back. That's the paradox. A storm disguised as sunlight, a thief dressed as a giver, and a heart that still aches for something it never really had. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about knowing too much and understanding nothing. Information is supposed to help us. The more you learn, the better you choose, right? But with information overload, the opposite happens. The more you know, the less you can move. The paradox is this: when you flood the brain with facts, opinions, charts, graphs, data, analysis, and updates, it doesn't make you smarter. It freezes you. You become so full of possibilities that you can't pick a single one. You think clarity comes from more knowledge, but overload turns clarity into chaos. You keep reading, scrolling, comparing, questioning, trying to make the best decision. But the best decision keeps vanishing the moment you think you've found it. You hesitate, you backtrack, you open another tab, and suddenly, you're not choosing anymore. You're just circling. Here's the twist. This paralysis doesn't come from ignorance. It comes from too much exposure. You don't suffer because you don't know enough. You suffer because you've seen every side. You've seen the pros, the cons, the counter-arguments, the rebuttals, the devil's advocate, the think pieces, and now, even the simplest choice feels like a trap. That's the paradox. You're so aware of every path that none of them feel right. It's like drowning in clean water. You're surrounded by exactly what you need, but you can't breathe. Every breath is another detail, another opinion, another layer. And instead of helping you rise, it drags you deeper. You think if you just read one more thing, everything will click. But it doesn't. The puzzle only grows. Even worse, some of the information conflicts. One article says this is healthy, another says it's dangerous. One says act now, another says wait. One says success comes from hustle, another says it comes from rest. And now you're not just overwhelmed, you're confused. The paradox is that with each new piece of information, your confidence drops. The more you learn, the less you believe in your own ability to decide. At some point, you forget what your original question even was. You went in looking for clarity and came out doubting your own judgment. You start to rely on experts, but they don't agree. So you move from source to source, hoping someone will just tell you what to do. Not because you're lazy, but because the burden of thinking has turned into noise. And it doesn't end. The world keeps feeding you more. New data, new trends, new research, new advice. Every second, information comes faster than your brain can process. And that's the paradox again. Knowledge has never been more available, and yet decision-making has never felt more impossible. You don't suffer from lack of access. You suffer from too much access. And now the very tool designed to free you has become the reason you're stuck. You try to simplify, but even the act of simplifying needs information. You search how to simplify information. Now you're back in the loop. Even minimalism has guides, methods, contradictions. Even stepping back requires research. There's no escape hatch. There's only deeper tunnels that all look like exits. And then something strange happens. You stop making decisions. Not just big ones, small ones too. What to wear, what to eat, what to read. You start to feel numb, not because you're tired, but because your brain is tired of choosing. That's the side effect. Not chaos, not confusion, but apathy. You begin to feel like no choice matters because each one is buried under a mountain of possibilities. The paradox is that the more options you have, the less they mean. This doesn't only apply to news or science or health, it applies to life itself. Careers, relationships, hobbies, every direction is filled with too many opinions. You want to start something new? There are 15 conflicting views on how to begin. You want to change something about yourself? Everyone has a method, and most of them contradict each other. You want to do the right thing, but there are thousands of versions of right, and each voice says theirs is the only one that works. You start to wonder if certainty even exists anymore, or if it ever did. Maybe the real problem isn't the overload. Maybe it's the belief that somewhere out there is the perfect answer if you just keep digging. That belief keeps you frozen. It convinces you that deciding now is dangerous, that waiting will give you clarity. But it never comes, because the flow of information never ends. And the longer you wait, the heavier it all becomes. Here's another twist. You can become addicted to it, to the search, to the updates, to the thrill of discovering new angles. It feels like progress, but it's motion without movement. The paradox is that researching makes you feel productive, even when you're doing nothing. You confuse collecting information with taking action. And in that space, days pass, weeks, sometimes more, and all you have is a stack of half-read articles and a head full of unfinished thoughts. You start to feel like you can't trust your intuition anymore, because your intuition doesn't have footnotes. It doesn't link to sources. It just feels. But now, feeling isn't enough. You want proof. You want backup. You want certainty. And because that's impossible in a world of constant contradiction, you shut down. You silence the very part of you that used to lead the way. And the cruelest part? Someone else can use this against you. If they want to control you, all they have to do is give you more to think about, more options, more warnings, more scenarios, paralysis by complexity. They don't need to lie. They just need to distract you with layers, because confusion is control. If you can't decide, someone else will do it for you. That's the danger hiding inside the overload. So what do? How do you act in a world where every answer has an argument and every truth has a counterpoint? That's the final paradox. To move forward, you sometimes have to act before you're sure, to choose without perfect knowledge, to risk being wrong, because waiting for certainty in an endless sea of input means you'll never move at all. Information is supposed to free us, but when it floods instead of flows, it builds a cage, a mental traffic jam, a quiet panic. And in that stillness, you realize too much knowing doesn't make you wise. It makes you stuck, not because you're lost, but because you can see too many roads, and none of them feel safe to take. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about the loudest kind of silence. Silence is supposed to mean peace, space, calm. But when it's used as a weapon, it becomes something else entirely. It turns into pressure, into control, into punishment. The paradox is that by saying nothing, someone can say everything without giving you a single word to fight back against. They don't yell, they don't argue, they just stop responding, stop looking, stop reacting, and suddenly the entire emotional climate shifts. You're no longer in a conversation, you're in a vacuum. And the paradox is this: they look calm, but you're falling apart. Their silence grows louder, even though it's made of nothing. You try to ask what's wrong, no answer. You try to fix things, no response. You explain yourself, still nothing. And slowly, you begin to feel like the silence itself is your fault. That's the trap. That's how silence turns into a mirror, one that only reflects your own fear, your guilt, your doubt. The longer the silence lasts, the more convinced you become that you're the problem. It doesn't feel like power at first. It feels like distance. But that distance keeps stretching, and you start to chase. You fill the silence with apologies, with explanations, with promises. You do more, say more, give more, just to hear something back. And that's the paradox. The less they give, the more you offer. You shrink yourself trying to reach them, while they say nothing and gain control. And here's the twist. They can claim innocence the whole time. I didn't do anything, they say. And it's technically true. That's what makes it so difficult to call out. They didn't yell or insult or break anything. They just withdrew. But their silence isn't peaceful. It's sharp. It cuts not with sound, but with absence. It doesn't scream. It stares. It doesn't attack. It abandons. But the damage feels just as deep. Now your brain starts to loop. You replay everything you said, everything you did. You try to find the moment where the silence began, because the silence doesn't tell you the rules. It just punishes you for breaking them. And here's the paradox. You start to believe that any reaction, even a cruel one, would feel better than this, because at least cruelty is loud. At least cruelty gives you something to respond to. But silence, it traps you with questions and gives you no way out. It becomes a kind of power that doesn't need explanation, a quiet form of dominance, not through volume, but through the refusal to engage. And over time, that power becomes addictive. They learn that by saying nothing, they can make you bend. They don't have to be right. They just have to wait. And because the silence is so uncomfortable, you do whatever it takes to make it stop. That's the paradox. The one who walks away wins. And still, they look like they're doing nothing. That's the brilliance of the tactic. No visible aggression, just blankness, just absence, just a still wall that makes you doubt your own worth. The silence becomes the conversation, and you're the only one still speaking. And it's not always full silence. Sometimes they talk to others, smile in front of friends, but to you, they're gone. You become the exception. That sharp contrast makes the silence even louder. They're fine with the world, just not with you. The message is clear. You are frozen out, but no one else sees it. That's the paradox again. They look normal. You look sensitive. You might even start to defend them. You say, maybe they just need space. You tell yourself, they're just not ready to talk. But days pass, then more, and you're still waiting, still chasing, still questioning. And deep down, you know this isn't space. This is punishment dressed as stillness. This is silence that corners you, that tells you, you don't matter until I say you do. Eventually, you stop speaking too, not because you're strong, but because you're tired. And now, the silence spreads. Two people, no words, a room full of tension. And the paradox is this: silence used to mean connection, a quiet moment with someone you loved. Now, it feels like war, a standoff where every second of stillness is a bullet in the air. Even if they return, the silence leaves a mark, a scar you carry into future moments. You hesitate before speaking. You flinch at long pauses. You feel like at any moment, the silence could return and take everything with it. That's how silence becomes memory. You start to hear echoes of it even when they're talking. And here's the most twisted part. The silence can feel more damaging than a fight, because at least a fight has energy, emotion, presence. But silence feels like erasure, like you've been muted, not just ignored. And the paradox is that silence leaves no evidence, but it lingers longer than words ever could. You start to wonder if you're overreacting. After all, they didn't say anything cruel. They just said nothing. But that's the point. They said nothing when you needed something, when you reached out, when you were vulnerable, when you wanted to connect, and the silence told you, you don't deserve a reply, and then it becomes a pattern. Every time something gets hard, they go silent. They disappear emotionally. They punish with absence, and you adjust. You tiptoe. You avoid conflict. Not because it's solved, but because silence is worse than fighting. You learn to protect their comfort at the cost of your own peace. That's the paradox. You begin to silence yourself just to avoid their silence. This is how control is passed without force, how emotions are shaped by nothing but stillness, how someone can hurt you deeply while never raising their voice, and how silence, which should be a shared breath, becomes a quiet chokehold. So here you are, speaking into silence, hoping for sound, doubting your feelings, apologizing for needs, and all because the quiet became louder than truth. That's the paradox of silence used as a weapon. It doesn't leave bruises, but it breaks something deeper. It doesn't scream, but it shouts through every second of nothing. And somehow, even without a word, it always gets the last say. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about how someone can control you without even looking at you, by looking at someone else. Triangulation is the strange act of bringing in a third person, not to include, but to divide, not to build connection, but to twist it. It creates a triangle where there should be a straight line. And the paradox is this: the third person doesn't even have to be real to have power over you. They just have to exist in your mind. You could be close to someone, you think there's trust, but then they bring up someone else, a friend, an example, a stranger, or even an imagined figure. They talk about how funny that person is, how helpful, how attractive, how understanding. And you feel a shift, a quiet threat hiding in a compliment. Suddenly, you're not just with them. You're in a competition you didn't sign up for. They don't say anything cruel. In fact, it sounds innocent, maybe even flattering. You're great, but Sarah just gets me. You're fun, but John's always so chill. They keep you off balance, wondering if you're enough. The paradox is that by bringing someone else into the story, they make you feel like the one being unreasonable. Now you feel the pressure. You try harder. You change how you talk, how you dress, how you act. Not because they asked, but because they didn't. That's the twist. They don't have to demand anything. The shadow of the third person does all the work. It creates tension without a word of conflict. You compete, but no one told you the rules. And the third person might not even be aware they're being used. That's another layer. This is not a triangle of people. It's a triangle of control. You feel compared, measured, not by merit, but by manipulation. You're not building trust. You're fighting for approval. That's the paradox. Instead of bringing people together, this triangle isolates you. It's subtle. You feel jealous, but also ashamed of feeling jealous. You feel insecure, but you hide it to seem strong. The more you care, the worse it gets. You think if you can just prove yourself, they'll stop bringing up the other person, but they don't. Because triangulation isn't about the third person, it's about your reaction. And once they see it working, they keep going. They don't need to insult you. They don't need to argue. They just place the third party in the room and let your thoughts do the damage. You create the tension in your own head. That's the cruel twist. You end up hurting yourself with doubts they only had to suggest. You imagine conversations that never happened. You replay every comment. You overanalyze every interaction, and it drains you. Even if they say they love you, the triangle stays, because now love feels like something you have to earn, something you might lose to someone else. So you become smaller, more agreeable, less yourself. You try to be everything they want because you're afraid someone else already is. That's the paradox. Instead of building a deeper bond, you're busy performing for it. And if you ever confront them, they act surprised. I was just talking about a friend. You're overthinking it. Why are you so insecure? They flip the blame. Now you're not just hurt. You're guilty for being hurt. And they look innocent, even while they control the entire emotional field. It doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's as small as a comment, a glance, a social media post. They don't need to say, "You should be jealous." They just need you to feel it. The third person becomes a tool, a pressure point, and you can't escape it because even walking away means wondering if they'll just move on to the other person. That's the final twist. You feel stuck, even when staying hurts. This tactic doesn't just create jealousy, it creates dependency. You start to measure your worth by how close they are to you and how far they are from that third person. You stop asking, "Is this love?" and start asking, "Am I winning?" And even when you win, it never feels like enough, because the triangle isn't designed to end. It's designed to keep you trying. The third person can be anyone, an old flame, a best friend, a coworker, a fictional threat. Sometimes it's not even someone better, it's someone different. That difference becomes a source of pressure. And now you're not just insecure, you're confused about who you're supposed to be. The paradox is that while they say they want you, they keep shaping you into someone else. You begin to resent the third person, even if they've done nothing wrong. That's how the manipulation spreads. It pulls you away from others. It makes you suspicious, guarded, anxious, not just with them, but with yourself. You start to question your reactions, your instincts, your voice. The triangle isolates you emotionally until they are the only person who can relieve the tension they created. You think if you leave, the spell will break. But even after it ends, the feeling can linger. You may still compare yourself to others. You may still fear being replaced. You may still look over your shoulder, wondering who the next better version of you will be. That's the echo of triangulation. It lives on even after the triangle is gone. And here's the strangest part. They may not even be fully aware of what they're doing. Some people use triangulation without realizing it. It's a learned behavior, a way to control without looking controlling, a way to win attention, devotion, power, without ever asking directly. And because it works, they keep doing it. That's the paradox. A person can harm you through games they don't admit they're playing. But sometimes they do know, and they enjoy it. They like watching you compete. They like seeing you react, because in that moment, they feel important, chosen, powerful. They sit at the top of the triangle, being admired by both sides. And they never have to pick. They just shift their attention, and both sides scramble for their turn. That's the true power of triangulation. It lets someone control without committing. So here you are, trying to understand what changed, why your peace now feels like pressure, why love feels like a race, and why you're losing sleep over a person who might not even matter. The triangle isn't real, but the pain it causes is. That's the paradox. A third party can break your heart without ever entering the room. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about chasing a finish line that never stays in place. Moving the goalposts is the trick of shifting what counts as enough. You do what's asked, you meet the standard, but just when you think you've made it, the rules change, the bar is raised, the praise disappears, and suddenly what was once considered success is now seen as the bare minimum. The paradox is simple. The better you do, the more proof they have that you could have done more. It starts subtly, a compliment followed by a but, a nod followed by a shrug, a new demand right after you meet the last one. You think you're getting closer, but the target always drifts. And here's where it gets strange. You work harder to feel appreciated, but the harder you work, the less you're appreciated. That's the trap. That's the loop. You pour more in, only to get less back. You're not failing. You're just being told you are. And the paradox is that you try to fix it by succeeding again. You stay longer, you try harder, you push further, but the criteria keep changing, not because you're wrong, but because they need you to feel that you're not quite right. If you ever actually won, the control would end. So they make sure the win never comes. You get close to their expectations, and they shift the expectations. You clear one hurdle, and they raise the next one. You improve, and that improvement becomes the new baseline. Not celebrated, expected. What once would have been worthy of applause now gets silence. That's the psychological twist. You start to believe you're always one step behind, even though you're sprinting. You begin measuring yourself by an invisible standard. You chase approval you once had, but now it feels distant. You tell yourself, if I just do a little more, they'll be happy. But they never are. And the paradox is that their disappointment grows as your effort does. It's not about what you did. It's about keeping you chasing. You question your value, not because you lack it, but because someone keeps erasing the scoreboard. You never get to rest in your progress. You never get to say, I did it. Every win becomes a new starting line, and soon, it's not even about them anymore. You internalize the shifting goalposts. You start moving them yourself. You tell yourself you're not allowed to relax. You think if you're not growing, you're falling behind. You forget what success even looks like because it's never in front of you, only further ahead, just out of reach, just a little more. That's the paradox. You're drowning in progress, but starving for satisfaction. And when you finally ask, what do you want from me? They don't answer clearly. Or they say, I just want you to do your best. But somehow, your best keeps falling short. Not because it is short, but because they designed the measure to make sure it never feels long enough. You start apologizing more. You explain yourself. You try to read their tone, their face, their silence. You keep asking, did I mess up? But there was no real rule to begin with, only moving targets. So now your life becomes a guessing game, and the more you guess, the more tired you get. It doesn't matter what role you're in, partner, employee, friend, student. The goalpost game works the same way. It's a silent, shifting battlefield. You keep fighting battles that were never yours to win. You keep proving yourself to someone who doesn't want to see it. And if you ever push back, if you say, this isn't fair, they call you sensitive, ungrateful, defensive. They say, I just want what's best for you. But somehow, what's best always costs you more peace, more effort, more self-worth. That's the paradox again. The person who demands growth is the one making you feel smaller. You begin to wonder if you're too weak, too slow, too emotional. But the real problem isn't you. It's that you're running on a track that rewrites itself. Every lap you complete just resets the race. No finish line, no end. Only more distance disguised as opportunity. This is how people get controlled, by being kept in a permanent state of almost good enough, almost ready, almost respected. They're fed the idea that success is one step away, while the step keeps moving. That's how you keep someone striving without letting them rest. That's how you own their energy. It's manipulation by ambition. You're not pushed by vision. You're pulled by fear. Fear that stopping makes you unworthy. Fear that slowing down means being left behind. Fear that unless you keep proving, you'll be forgotten. And yet, you never arrive. Even your wins become fuel for future demands. You show improvement, and they respond with, why didn't you do this earlier? Or worse, silence. Your effort becomes invisible the moment it appears, like pouring water into a cup with no bottom. It never fills. It never satisfies. You try to lower your expectations, but part of you still hopes, still chases, still believes the next success might finally unlock approval. That's the heartbreak of it. You don't just want the goalpost to stop moving. You want it to tell you you're enough. But it doesn't. It can't, because that would end the game. And the game needs you striving, not settling, not self-assured, just slightly insecure, just a little desperate, just hungry enough to keep trying. And even when you leave that person, that job, that situation, the mindset follows. You set your own goals now, but even those move. You plan rest, but cancel it. You tell yourself you'll feel proud soon, but soon keeps slipping. The external pressure became internal law. That's the final paradox. They stopped moving the goalposts, but now you do it for them. You could have won 100 times by now, but you never got to see it. You were too busy chasing the next condition, too busy believing that the finish line was real when it was always just another illusion. So here you are, exhausted, confused, trying to catch a target that was never meant to be caught. And in that realization lies the cruel truth. The game was never about achievement. It was about control. And you played it beautifully until you saw that the scoreboard never mattered. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about blaming someone for your fire while you're still holding the match. Projection is the strange act of seeing your own flaws, but in someone else. It's not self-awareness. It's self-escape. Instead of facing your guilt, your mistakes, your darker thoughts, you aim them outward. You accuse the other person, loudly, confidently. And here's the paradox. The more guilty you are, the more convincing you sound, because you're not just lying to them, you're lying to yourself. It's like throwing your reflection at someone else and calling it their face. You say they're angry when it's you who's furious. You say they're being selfish while you're manipulating. You say they're hiding things, but you're the one with secrets. You point at them so no one looks at you, especially you. And the more they deny it, the more you insist, because now their confusion is proof. Their defense becomes your evidence. That's how the trap closes. The paradox deepens when the other person starts to believe you. They question their own motives. They start to wonder, am I really doing that? Did I miss something? You accuse them of being cruel, and they start over-apologizing. You accuse them of being untrustworthy, and they start explaining things they never did. And the more they doubt themselves, the safer you feel. Projection doesn't need proof. It only needs pressure. If you say something with enough emotion, enough volume, enough certainty, people stop asking if it's true. They start asking how to fix it. And now, your mess is cleaned up by someone else. That's the paradox. Your guilt becomes their burden. And you get to keep your mask. You walk away feeling right, even when you're wrong, feeling innocent, even when you're the cause of the pain. Because projection is a trick of reversal. You flip the mirror so fast that the other person forgets what they were even defending. Now they're on trial for your crime. And the person being projected on, they feel dizzy, not because they're guilty, but because the accusation came from someone they trusted, someone who seemed so sure. The paradox is that love makes projection more powerful. If you care about the person blaming you, you're more likely to believe them. Their words dig deeper, not because they're correct, but because they matter. They might say, "You always make everything about you," but it's them doing that. They might say, "You never listen," while refusing to hear a word you say. They accuse you of exactly what they're doing, and they say it first, so they win the ground. They plant the flag before you even knew there was a battlefield. And if you try to reflect it back, if you say, "Wait, isn't that what you're doing?" they accuse you again. There you go deflecting. There you go twisting things. And just like that, the mirror gets locked. They see their own flaws clearly, but only on your face. Projection is so powerful because it wears the costume of concern. They might sound like they're helping, like they're pointing something out for your own good, but underneath it is avoidance, fear, the refusal to look inward. And the louder they project, the more they silence their own guilt. You start to change to avoid their attacks. You walk carefully, speak gently, edit yourself, not because you agree with the blame, but because you want peace. But peace never comes, because projection doesn't want peace. It wants relief. And it gets that by turning you into a distraction. They sleep better while you lose sleep. They feel lighter while you carry both your confusion and their blame. That's the double weight of projection. You hold guilt you didn't earn, and questions you can't answer. And here's where the paradox curls in on itself. They may truly believe what they're saying. They might actually think you are the problem, because when a lie is repeated often enough, even internally, it becomes familiar. And familiarity feels like truth. So now, even in their mind, they're the victim. They're the one being mistreated. They've hidden from their guilt so long, they don't even recognize it anymore. But they still feel it, so they hand it to you. It doesn't matter what the topic is: jealousy, dishonesty, control, insecurity. Whatever they refuse to face in themselves, they will find in you. Not because it's there, but because it has to be. Otherwise, they'd have to look inward, and projection makes sure they never have to. It's not just manipulation, it's survival, a twisted kind. If they admit their guilt, their mask slips. So instead, they sharpen it, turn it into armor, and every time they hurt you with their accusations, they feel safer, more protected, because in blaming you, they don't have to blame themselves. And when you finally try to set a boundary, when you say, "That's not true," or "This isn't fair," they push back harder. They say you're avoiding responsibility. They say you're gaslighting. They use your resistance as fuel. That's the paradox again. The more you defend your truth, the more they twist it. They'll call you the liar while hiding behind half-truths. They'll say you're being dramatic while raising their voice. They'll accuse you of manipulation while carefully controlling the conversation. Everything they say about you is a clue to what they're hiding from. And if you start to see it clearly, if you start to untangle the knots, you face a new kind of pain. Because now you realize the connection wasn't real, not fully. It was a mirror game, a shadow play. And the person you thought was seeing you was only using you as a screen to project onto. You didn't fail them. You were just a surface, a place for them to throw the parts of themselves they couldn't handle. And you held it, hoping love would clean it up. But love can't fix projection. Only truth can. And truth is the one thing projection always runs from. So here you are, tired from carrying a guilt that isn't yours, weary from defending against a war you never started, and the person who caused it all still feels blameless. That's the paradox of projection. They break you, then blame you for bleeding. They punish you, then accuse you of being cold. And somehow, you're the one still trying to make sense of it all. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about offering a gift just to watch someone suffer without it. Bait and retreat is the trick of giving something beautiful, then taking it away, not to punish, but to control. It starts sweet, a promise, a compliment, a future, something that lights you up inside. It feels like luck, like finally, something good. You say yes, you lean in, you get attached, and then, just when you care the most, it vanishes, quietly, strategically. And the paradox is, the less real the offer was, the more real the loss feels. They say they'll be there. They show up strong, present, enthusiastic. They open the door wide. You walk through it. You build hopes inside it, and then they close it behind you, slow and silent. Now you're not walking forward. You're wondering where the floor went. And here's the twist. They don't take anything from you. They just take back what they never intended to give. It's not the offer that breaks you. It's the removal. Because loss doesn't need time to be painful. It just needs weight. The offer made you feel wanted, seen, special. It opened something inside you. And once it's gone, you're left with the echo. That echo becomes the leash. You don't move for joy anymore. You move to get back what you almost had. And that's the game. They dangle something meaningful, a role, a relationship, a reward. They watch your eyes light up. Then they retreat. Not completely, just enough. Enough to trigger fear. You chase. You try harder. You stretch yourself thinner. not because the offer got better, but because it's now slipping away. The paradox is, you work more for what's disappearing than for what's in your hands. You act out of loss, not gain, out of panic, not desire. They bait you with closeness, then create distance. They bait you with praise, then turn cold. They bait you with support, then go quiet. And you don't notice at first, because you're still chasing the high of what was offered. They don't need to demand anything. You offer it yourself. You give more time, more attention, more obedience, not because they asked, but because you want the feeling back. That's how control works without control. You do all the work to recover something they never truly gave. And if you confront them, they act confused. I never promised anything, they'll say. And it's true. Often the bait is just subtle enough to stay deniable. A suggestion, a look, a future we that was never actually scheduled. That's the paradox. They take back nothing and still make you feel like you lost everything. You don't just mourn the offer. You mourn the version of you who felt hope, who believed in it. You start to question whether it ever existed, whether it was your imagination, and the more unsure you get, the deeper they root themselves in your mind. Now you're not just chasing the offer, you're chasing reality. What was real? What wasn't? That confusion becomes the leash, and the better the bait, the worse the retreat, because now you're measuring your emptiness against what almost was. It doesn't have to be big. It can be a promise of emotional safety, a taste of affection, a sign of approval. Once you feel it and lose it, you'll do almost anything to feel it again. That's the paradox. The thing you're missing never belonged to you, and still it owns you. They reward your effort just enough to keep you in it. One compliment after weeks of coldness, one sweet message after silence, one flash of warmth after withdrawal. It's not real giving. It's rationed relief. You begin to accept scraps and call it progress. You celebrate tiny returns like they're grand gestures, and you adjust. You expect less, but want more. You start blaming yourself. Maybe you push too hard. Maybe you misread the signs. Maybe you're not doing enough to earn it back. The bait makes you feel chosen. The retreat makes you feel replaceable. That emotional swing is addictive. You go from feeling lucky to feeling desperate, and back again. The cycle becomes the relationship. Even if you leave, the pull lingers, because you never got closure. You never got to catch what you were chasing. You leave mid-sprint. You walk away, but your heart keeps running. That's the quiet torture. That's how someone can disappear while still occupying your thoughts. They don't need to be present. The absence becomes the control, and they might not even realize what they're doing. Sometimes it's calculated. Sometimes it's instinct. Some people learned early how to survive by giving just enough to be needed, then pulling back to feel wanted. Their power comes from being just out of reach. The paradox is, they need attention just as much as you need connection, but they only know how to take, not give. Other times, it's fully intentional, a game, a way to test how far you'll go, how much you'll bend, how long you'll wait. They don't need love, they need proof of control. So they bait, retreat, watch, repeat, and every time you come back, they learn how to string you along longer next time. You may not notice it happening. It feels like a normal push and pull, until one day, you realize you've given so much more than you've received. And yet, you still feel guilty for not giving enough. You still believe the offer was real, even after it's been pulled away again and again. You tell yourself it will return if you're more patient, more loyal, more perfect. But the truth is, it was never stable. It was never guaranteed. It was a hook, not a gift, a promise with no plan to be kept. And the paradox is, you fell not for what they gave, but for what they let you believe was possible. So here you are, empty-handed, heart full, chasing something that never belonged to you, obeying a feeling that was designed to fade, and trying to win back something that was never truly yours to begin with. That's the paradox of bait and retreat. What you miss most is something that never stayed long enough to be real, and somehow that makes it feel even more valuable. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about being loved just enough to never feel loved at all. Intermittent reinforcement is the strange art of rewarding someone inconsistently, just enough to keep them hooked, but never enough to set them free. One day, warmth; the next, cold. One moment, attention; then, silence. You don't know when the affection will come, but when it does, it feels like gold. And the paradox is, the less you receive, the more obsessed you become. It doesn't start with chaos. It starts with sweetness, a burst of kindness, a flood of affection. You feel seen, cared for, special. It feels like love, safety, connection. And just when you settle into it, when you start to trust it, it disappears. No warning, no reason. And now you're confused, not because it vanished, but because it once existed. That's the hook. You wait, you wonder, you replay everything. What did you do wrong? Why did it change? And then, just as the doubt starts to sink in, the kindness returns. A message, a smile, a moment of closeness. And it's even more powerful this time because it arrives after absence. The contrast amplifies the feeling. You feel relief, hope, gratitude, not because the love is big, but because it finally came back. And now, you're stuck, not in the pain, but in the pattern. You start chasing the next reward. You think, if I just say the right thing, if I stay patient, if I don't mess up, maybe it will stay this time. But it doesn't, because the game isn't about giving love. It's about controlling it. They don't reward your behavior to build connection. They do it to build dependence. The paradox is brutal. The more inconsistent they are, the more consistent you become. You try harder. You wait longer. You shrink yourself to avoid triggering the next withdrawal. Your life starts revolving around when they'll give again, and you start confusing that small hit of affection with real love, because it's rare, because it's unpredictable, because it feels earned. Like a slot machine, you keep pulling the handle. Most times, nothing, but once in a while, you hit a win, and the randomness feeds the addiction. If the rewards came every time, it would get boring. But the unpredictability keeps your brain alert. Hopeful, on edge, that's the science of intermittent reinforcement and the heartbreak of it. The less you're given, the more you need. They might not even give you much. A compliment, a quick laugh, a short reply. But because it follows emptiness, it feels like everything. Your emotions start swinging wildly, high from the reward, low from the silence. You lose balance, not because they're powerful, but because your nervous system has been trained to chase crumbs. And when you try to talk about it, they say you're too sensitive, too needy, too intense. They tell you they've been there all along, that you're overreacting. Now you're not just doubting their behavior, you're doubting your own feelings. That's the trap. You think you're unstable, when in fact you're responding normally to emotional chaos. This kind of reinforcement makes you second-guess every move. You read their tone like a code. You study their messages like puzzles. You become hyper-aware, over-invested, emotionally exhausted. Not because you're weak, but because your brain has been wired to survive the pattern, to anticipate the next reward, even when it never comes. And the strange thing is, when they do give affection, it feels stronger than it should, not because the love is deep, but because the absence made you starve. Now every small moment feels like rescue, like healing, like salvation, but it's none of those things. It's bait, disguised as grace. You begin making excuses for them. They're just busy. They're not good at texting. They show love in different ways. But deep down, You feel the gaps, the dips, the uncertainty. You tell yourself to stay calm, to wait longer, to hope harder, but the longer you wait, the more you dissolve. And the paradox is this: they don't need to do much. They just have to be less cruel than they were yesterday. And that feels like kindness. You start rewarding them for not being absent, for being decent, for showing basic attention. You lower your standards until the floor disappears. And still, you call it love. Even when you leave, the cycle haunts you. You wait for messages that don't come. You replay the highs. You wonder if they'll reach out, if maybe this time they'll be different. But the silence that used to hurt now feels normal. Your nervous system has adjusted to pain. It expects the pattern, and even after freedom, you feel the ghost of it. This kind of control doesn't look loud. It doesn't always look abusive. It looks like inconsistency, like confusion, like passion that flickers on and off. But the effect is deep. You lose time, energy, identity. You mold yourself into someone who is easier to reward, and you forget who you were before the pattern started. And here's the harsh truth. They may not even notice what they're doing, or they might know exactly. Some people learned early that withholding makes others cling. That inconsistency creates obsession. They don't need to manipulate directly. They just stay unpredictable, and you do the rest. That's the darkest part. The longer it lasts, the more you train yourself to stay. And you're not addicted to them. You're addicted to the relief they sometimes give, to the moment the silence breaks, to the dopamine spike after the drought, and you tell yourself, maybe this time will be different. Maybe they'll change. But the very structure is designed not to change, because change would end the power. So here you are, tired, wired, waiting for a message, a look, a shift, hoping for the warmth that comes after the cold. And every time it comes, you fall a little deeper. Not because you don't see the game, but because the game keeps feeling like love. That's the paradox of intermittent reinforcement. The more they withhold, the more valuable they become in your mind. Not because they give so much, but because they made you feel lucky to get so little. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about giving someone everything, so they can't survive without you. Forced dependency isn't about support. It's about control dressed as care. It looks like help, but it's a trap. You take away someone's power slowly, then offer to carry them. You remove their legs, then become their crutch. And the paradox is this: the more you help them, the more helpless they become. It doesn't start with chains. It starts with comfort. Let me handle that. You don't need to worry. I'll take care of it. It feels like love, like security, like safety. You relax, you lean in, you let go, and while your hands are open, they quietly remove what was yours, your choices, your tools, your voice, and when you finally try to stand alone again, you realize your legs are gone. The paradox is that dependency feels like being cared for until you need to care for yourself. Then it becomes a cage, a soft one made of routines, patterns, habits. You forget when you last made a decision without asking first. You stop trusting your own judgment, and when you do speak up, it sounds like a whisper, even to you. They may not shout, they may not control with force, they control with need. You need them to drive, you need them to decide, you need them to guide. You stop asking whether it's right and start asking whether they'll be okay with it. Your compass shifts, and now their comfort is your purpose. They keep you close by keeping you small, and they call it love. They say, I just want what's best for you. I worry about you. You're not ready. And it sounds sweet until you realize those words are bricks. And together, they build a wall around your life. And if you try to step outside that wall, they panic. They guilt you. They act hurt. Or they remind you of all they've done. After everything I've given you, you wouldn't even be here without me. That's the moment you realize the help wasn't a gift. It was a debt you never agreed to owe. The more you lean on them, the less you're allowed to grow. Every time you try, they pull you back, not with anger, but with doubt. Are you sure? What if it doesn't work out? You always need me when things go wrong. They plant fear where you once had courage. That's how control grows quietly, through concern. And the paradox deepens when you start doubting yourself. You think, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I do need them. You lose your voice and call it humility. You lose your strength and call it trust. You give them power and call it love. But none of it is real unless you're free to walk away. They may even encourage your independence, just enough to keep the illusion alive. Go do it, they say, but let me help. Try it, they say, but call me first. It feels like support, but it's a leash, a long one. You can walk, but not far. The moment you pull too hard, it snaps back. And when things go wrong, and they will, they're right there. See, this is why I take care of things. Next time, just let me handle it. They become your rescuer and your captor at the same time. That's the paradox. The person who saves you is also the reason you keep drowning. They might not even know they're doing it. Some people mistake control for love. They believe if someone needs them, they're important, so they keep making themselves necessary. They give help that creates weakness. They offer support that takes away skill. And all the while, they feel proud, needed, essential, not realizing they've erased the very person they claim to love. But sometimes, they know exactly what they're doing. They don't want a partner. They want a dependent, someone who won't leave, someone who can't. So they strip away freedom piece by piece, not fast, not loud, but steady, predictable. They call it structure, but it's a quiet kind of prison. They keep you close by keeping you uncertain. They do the talking, the deciding, the fixing. You do the thanking, the nodding, the waiting. You forget how to function without checking in first. You stop trusting your own instincts. And slowly, you vanish. You don't just lose freedom. You lose your sense of self. You forget what it felt like to choose, to fail on your own terms, to feel proud because you did it without permission. And the longer it goes, the more fragile you feel. The paradox is brutal. You feel weak because you've been told you are, and then they use your weakness as proof that they're right. You think about leaving, but panic hits. How would you survive? How would you manage? Where would you go? And that panic isn't proof you're not ready. It's proof they trained you not to be. The moment you try to leave is the moment you see how much they took. Even if they say, you're free to go, they know you won't, because now the cage is in your mind. You don't need locked doors when you've convinced someone they can't walk. That's the cruelest paradox of all. You believe the chains are your own fault, but they're not. You didn't ask to be rescued from your own strength. You didn't ask for help that left you powerless. You didn't ask for love that kept you small. You asked to be seen, supported, believed in. What you got was something else, something that looked like care but felt like suffocation. So here you are, wrapped in comfort that became control, grateful for help that made you helpless, tied to someone who says they love you, but only when you stay beneath them. And now you wonder, how do you break free from someone who says they're just trying to protect you? That's the paradox of forced dependency. You're given everything you need, except the right to need yourself. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about changing the truth without changing the facts. Reframing is not about what happened. It's about how it's told. It's the art of bending perception without touching reality. You shift the angle, twist the tone, smooth the edges. You paint over moments with softer colors. And the paradox is, you can lie without ever saying anything false. It begins small. I didn't yell. I raised my voice because I care. I wasn't ignoring you. I was giving you space. It wasn't manipulation. It was just passion. And slowly, the story changes. The details stay the same, but the meaning is flipped. Pain becomes misunderstanding. Cruelty becomes concern. Control becomes protection. And the more it's reframed, the more confused you feel. Because your memory starts to clash with their version. You remember how it felt, the tension, the silence, the sting, but when they describe it, it sounds different. Softer, reasonable, calm. And here's the paradox. The more they explain, the more you start to doubt your own experience. They're not denying the event. They're just repackaging it, putting a new label on the same box. And when the label sounds better than your feelings, you hesitate. You wonder if you're being dramatic, if you misunderstood, if maybe, just maybe, they're right. That's the trap. You begin to rewrite your own memory, not because it changed, but because they told the story better. Reframing is subtle. It doesn't demand. It persuades. It makes wrong sound right by giving it new words. It makes harm feel harmless by shifting the focus. Instead of asking, "What did I do?" they ask, "Why are you taking it that way?" The burden moves from the action to your reaction. That's how reframing avoids blame, by redefining the meaning of pain. And if you push back, they stay calm. You're not seeing the full picture. It's not black and white. You're focusing on the negative. They make you feel narrow-minded for noticing what hurt. They sound wise while you sound emotional. They sound objective while you feel unstable. But nothing changed, except the frame. That's the brilliance of the paradox. You're not arguing facts. You're arguing interpretations. You're not saying, "This happened." You're saying, "This hurt." And they respond, "That's not what it was." Now you're not defending truth, you're defending feelings, which makes you easier to discredit. They become the narrator of your life. They edit the chapters, highlight the parts that flatter them, erase the ones that don't. They keep telling the story their way until everyone around them believes it. And sometimes you do too. That's the scary part. You begin to retell the story in their words. You adjust your tone. You correct your own emotions. You become your own editor. They'll say they were patient when they were distant. Say they were honest when they were cruel. Say they were pushed when they were controlling. They don't take accountability. They rewrite it. They don't own the impact. They reinterpret the intention. And that makes it impossible to move forward. Because how can you heal from something you're not allowed to name? Even when you confront them directly, they flip it. "I was just trying to help. You misunderstood my tone. You always assume the worst." Now you're defending not just your memory, but your character. And the more you try to prove what happened, the more they reframe the conversation itself. You say, "That hurt me." They say, "Why are you so negative?" You say, "That wasn't okay." They say, "Why do you always attack me?" Now you're not just confused, you're exhausted. You came to speak your truth, but ended up apologizing. Not for the event, but for how you felt. And the paradox is, they never had to convince you they were right. They just had to convince you you might be wrong. And when others get involved, the framing spreads. They share their version first. Calm, composed, convincing. You speak later. Shaken, frustrated, emotional. And now, to everyone else, you're the unstable one. Because they don't just reframe events. They reframe people. You become the difficult one, the reactive one, the unreliable narrator of your own life. That's the power of reframing. It doesn't erase what happened. It changes how it's remembered, how it's explained, how it's judged. And once the new frame is accepted, the original truth becomes irrelevant, not disproven, just overwritten. They might say, "You're overreacting," when your reaction is the only honest part. Or, "You're too sensitive," when your sensitivity is the only reason you notice the harm. They turn emotional insight into a weakness, and reason into a weapon. You lose not because you're wrong, but because they speak with more certainty. And it doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes people reframe to avoid shame, to protect their image. They can't admit fault, so they rewrite reality. But intention doesn't erase damage. If you're hurt, you're hurt. And if they won't name what they did, you're left bleeding from an invisible wound. And here's where the paradox curls in again. The better they are at reframing, the more you'll trust them. Because they sound logical, thoughtful, mature, and your pain sounds like noise next to their calm narrative. You start to believe that your emotions are the problem, that your memory is flawed, that your truth isn't solid enough to stand. But deep down, something doesn't sit right, a quiet ache, a persistent question, and that's where freedom begins, not in fighting their version, but in trusting your own, in naming what you felt, in holding on to your story even when it doesn't fit their frame. So here you are, living a truth someone else keeps painting over, trying to stay honest in a room full of revision, learning that the loudest voice isn't always the truest one, and realizing that sometimes the only way to break free from a false story is to stop explaining and start believing what you already know. That's the paradox of reframing. Nothing changes but the words, and somehow the entire story disappears. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about making someone feel closer while quietly cutting them off from everything else. Social isolation doesn't start with a locked door. It starts with little suggestions, small comments, quiet doubts. I don't think they really support you. Your friends are jealous. Your family doesn't understand us. It sounds like protection, like care, like love. And that's the paradox. It feels like someone pulling you close when really they're pulling you away. You don't notice it at first. You feel special, chosen, like the connection you have with them is rare, maybe even sacred. They make you feel like it's you and them against the world. And the paradox is, you start to believe that the rest of the world is the problem. They question the people closest to you, not directly, just enough to plant a seed, a little doubt, a little suspicion, and the seed grows. Slowly you begin to pull back. You cancel plans. You don't share as much. You stop reaching out, not because you want to, but because you don't want tension. You don't want to deal with the questions. You just want peace. But peace, in this case, means silence. And that's when it begins to tighten. You realize you're seeing fewer people, having fewer conversations, and every time you try to reconnect, they make it hard. They pout. They act cold. They accuse you of caring more about others than about them. So you back off again. And now, without realizing it, they've become your only real point of contact, the only consistent voice in your life, the one you have to answer to, even when no one else is left to answer. The paradox is sharp. They make you feel safe while removing the people who actually love you. You think they're saving you from outside harm, but they're building a wall around you, not to protect you, but to isolate you. And once the wall is high enough, you forget what the world even looked like before. You start to rely on them more, for validation, support, company, permission, not because they forced you, but because they slowly became your whole sky. And when someone becomes your sky, it's hard to remember what life looked like when you had more than one sun. And even if you do sense the distance growing, they'll always have a reason. I just want more time with you. Those people don't respect our relationship. Why do you need them when you have me? It sounds loving. But love that isolates isn't love. It's control wrapped in comfort. Eventually, you stop sharing things about your life with anyone but them, not because you don't want to, but because no one else is there. The silence outside your bubble gets louder, and the paradox is that the more alone you become, the more you cling to the person who caused it. You feel vulnerable so you hold tighter. But what you're holding is the thing that made you vulnerable. You think you're choosing them, but you're actually choosing survival, because when you've been cut off from your support system, the idea of losing even one more connection, especially the last one, feels terrifying. So you adapt, you agree, you change your tone, you stop asking questions, you become easier to keep around. They might even say things like, "I'm all you need. We don't need anyone else." And if you ever try to pull away, they guilt you, they act hurt, they say you're abandoning them, they accuse you of being ungrateful, and you believe them, because they're the only voice left in the room. And here's the twist. Even if someone tries to help you, you might push them away. Not because you want to, but because you've been trained to doubt them. You've been taught to see their concern as interference. You defend the person isolating you. You protect the wall they built. That's the paradox, when the prison feels safer than the freedom outside it. You might even start thinking that you chose this, that you simply grew apart from others, that it just happened. But isolation rarely just happens. It's guided, slowly, steadily, intentionally. It's never loud, it's always quiet. And by the time you realize you're alone, it already feels too late to go back. And if you try to reconnect with the world, it's awkward. People you once saw often now feel like strangers. The distance has changed things. You feel like an outsider in places that once felt like home. That's what makes isolation last. Shame. The shame of returning. The fear that people will ask where you've been, and you won't know what to say. So you stay. Not because you're happy, but because the silence feels easier than the truth. You tell yourself it's fine, that you don't need anyone else, that this is just how life is. But deep down, you miss connection. You miss laughter that isn't filtered. You miss advice that isn't loaded. You miss being known by people who don't need to control you to feel close to you. And they may not even see themselves as controlling. They may say they're just protective, that they're looking out for you. But protecting you from everyone eventually becomes protecting you from yourself. And love that doesn't trust you to think, to feel, to choose, stops being love. It becomes ownership. And here's the strangest part. The more isolated you are, the harder it is to recognize what's happening. Your thoughts start to sound like theirs. Your doubts come in their voice. Your reality becomes theirs. You don't even need them in the room. Their rules live in your head. And even if they leave you one day, the walls often stay. You've been cut off for so long, you don't know how to reach out, how to reconnect. You fear judgment. You forget what support felt like. And the paradox is, even after they're gone, their absence keeps you isolated. So here you are, surrounded by quiet, cut off, but told you're loved, confused, but told you're cared for, and the only voice still close enough to hear keeps telling you they're all you need. That's the paradox of social isolation. They make the world disappear, then call themselves your world. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about keeping someone safe by making them feel constantly in danger. Fear implantation doesn't come with alarms or warnings. It arrives gently, through suggestion, through concern, through a soft tone that hides a sharp edge. Be careful who you trust. You never know what people are really thinking. It's a dangerous world out there. It sounds like protection, but it's not meant to help. It's meant to unsettle. And the paradox is that you begin to feel watched, even when no one is looking. It starts with a story, something bad that happened to someone else, something vague but haunting. You hear it, you file it away, and the next time you feel doubt, that story comes back. Suddenly, you see shadows where there are none. You hear warning bells in silence. You become alert, careful, paralyzed, and the one who told you the story, they're the only person who feels safe That's how fear takes root, not in panic, but in quiet. It's not loud enough to scream over your logic. It's just steady enough to live beneath it. You start checking twice, hesitating, holding back, and every time you question it, they confirm it with care. I'm just looking out for you. You're lucky I told you. Imagine what could have happened. They act like a shield, but they're the ones holding the sword. The paradox is cruel. The more anxious you feel, the more you trust the person who caused it, because they offer relief, comfort, answers, but they're solving a problem they created. They ignite the fire, then offer you a glass of water, and you thank them for it, because you forgot they lit the match. Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it shows up as hesitation, doubt, gut feelings that aren't really yours. You start thinking the worst, not because it's true, but because the idea was planted, not forced, implanted, like a seed in soft ground. It grows slowly. It doesn't shout. It whispers, "What if? What if they leave? What if they lie? What if this fails?" And every time you try to ignore it, they water the fear. A comment, a look, a memory, just enough to keep you uncertain. That's how control is built through fear, not by making you scared of them, but by making you scared of everything else. And the more you fear, the smaller your world becomes. You stop taking risks, you stop reaching out, you stop trusting yourself, and they're always there, nodding. Good choice. See, you're learning. You think they're teaching you wisdom, but really, they're teaching you to obey. And here's the paradox again. The fears don't even have to be real. They just have to feel possible. They don't need proof, just presence. A quiet suggestion can be more powerful than a loud demand. You obey not because someone told you to, but because your own thoughts have been reshaped to serve their purpose. They don't say, "Don't go out." They say, "I heard someone got followed last night." They don't say, "Don't trust them." They say, "Just be careful. People can be tricky." And now, every step you take feels loaded. Every action feels like a risk, and standing still starts to feel like safety. But that safety is an illusion. You're not avoiding real danger. You're avoiding imagined threats that keep you frozen. The person who implanted them calls it awareness. They act like they've opened your eyes, but what they've really done is blur your vision. They've swapped confidence for caution, voice for silence, movement for stillness. You stop questioning the source. You stop wondering why you feel this way. And that's how fear implantation works best. When you no longer remember where the fear began, it becomes part of you. You think it's your own voice, your own doubt, but it isn't. It was given to you, gently, over time. And if you ever resist, they switch strategies. They act wounded, surprised. "I just didn't want you to get hurt." "You don't believe me?" Now, you're the one who's wrong, who's ungrateful, who's naive. And the paradox sharpens. The person who's made you afraid now says they're the only one who truly cares. You don't see them as the problem. You see them as the protector. And the more fear you carry, the more you turn to them. For comfort, for permission, for guidance. You rely on them because fear has erased every other direction. You no longer make choices. You seek approval, and they always give it. Once they know you've chosen the path they already wanted. Fear makes you easier to guide, easier to shape, and because it feels internal, it's invisible from the outside. Others may not notice what's happening. You might not either. You just look cautious, nervous, careful, but underneath that, you're being directed by shadows. Even when nothing goes wrong, the fear still wins. Because fear doesn't need results, it only needs doubt. And every time you give into it, your trust in yourself weakens. That's how fear becomes self-sustaining. You avoid things just in case, and then use that avoidance as proof that you were right to be afraid. And eventually, you may forget who you were before the fear, before the anxious thoughts, before every choice came with a warning label, the person you used to be, the one who said yes, who took chances, who didn't ask for permission, starts to feel like a stranger, or worse, a fool. You don't remember being implanted. You just remember becoming cautious, becoming small, becoming quiet. And the paradox is, you now live in a cage that doesn't have locks. You could leave, but the fear whispers that the world outside is worse. And that's how fear wins, not by roaring, but by suggesting, by hinting, by planting ideas that grow roots before you realize they're not yours. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're just obeying the voice that taught you to be afraid in the first place. So here you are, walking carefully, thinking twice, asking before you act, not because you're unsure, but because someone taught you to doubt everything you are. And the more you obey the fear, the more you believe it must be wisdom. That's the paradox of fear implantation. You feel safe because you're scared, and you stay scared because safety is the only thing keeping you from waking up. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about doing something wrong and making someone else say sorry for it. Shifting blame isn't just avoiding fault, it's turning it into a weapon. Something that shouldn't land on you gets thrown like a hot coal into someone else's hands. You drop the responsibility, but not onto the floor, onto a person. And here's the paradox. The more mistakes you make, the more guilty they feel. It starts simple. Something goes wrong, a fight, a failure, a missed plan, and instead of taking a moment to reflect, to admit, to own it, you point. You point fast before they even realize what's happening. You should have reminded me. If you hadn't reacted like that. I only did that because of what you did first. And now the conversation isn't about the action anymore. It's about how they supposedly caused it. They start to question themselves. Maybe they did say something wrong. Maybe they should have done more. Maybe this whole thing is their fault. They're not thinking about what you did. They're too busy searching through their own memories trying to find the moment they broke everything. That's the shift. That's the trick. And once they take the weight, you walk lighter. The paradox is sharp. You mess up and they walk away feeling worse. And because they care, because they don't want to hurt you, they take it. They shoulder the blame to protect the relationship. But the more they carry, the less they trust themselves. And the less they trust themselves, the easier they are to control. You don't have to raise your voice. You just have to raise doubt. Doubt in their memory, doubt in their behavior, doubt in their heart. You're always so sensitive. You're overreacting. Why do you make such a big deal out of everything? Now they're not just blaming themselves for the problem. They're blaming themselves for even bringing it up. And even when it's clearly your fault, you twist it. You highlight one small detail in their reaction. You said it with a tone. You walked away. You didn't say anything when I needed you to. And suddenly, the focus is no longer on the moment you lost control, but the moment they failed to handle it perfectly. You don't need to erase your mistakes. You just need to distract from them. Blame is a spotlight. You aim it wherever you want. And they adapt. They get quieter, more cautious. They begin to speak in apologies, to walk on eggshells, not because they're guilty, but because they've been trained to expect they will be. And that's the paradox again. They start saying sorry before anything happens. That way, you don't even have to shift blame. They offer it first. Even when they've done nothing wrong, they feel like they have. They begin to explain things they don't need to explain, to defend themselves against accusations that haven't even been made. Their confidence fades, their voice shrinks, and the more uncertain they feel, the more certain you seem. It doesn't always come from malice. Some people shift blame to avoid feeling weak, to protect their image, to avoid shame. But intent doesn't change the effect. The person on the other end still walks away confused, hurting, carrying a burden that was never theirs. And when you get praised for something, you take full credit. But when something breaks, you scatter the blame like pieces of glass, sharp, shiny, dangerous, and if someone steps on one, you act surprised. I didn't mean for that to happen. I thought you were stronger than this. Now they're not just bleeding, they're apologizing for bleeding. The longer it goes on, the harder it is for them to see it. They lose track of which mistakes were actually theirs. Their memory gets blurred by guilt. They can't trust themselves anymore. And that's the final twist. You no longer need to shift the blame. They do it for you, automatically. They start thinking they cause your moods, your silence, your anger, your distance, and you let them think that. Because if they believe it's their fault, they'll work to fix it, not by asking you to change, but by changing themselves, apologizing more, trying harder, making themselves smaller. And if they finally speak up, if they say, "This doesn't feel right," you double down. Here we go again. You always turn things into drama. Why can't you just let things go? Now their truth becomes the next thing to blame. The act of calling out the pattern becomes another offense. That's how the cycle repeats. That's how the trap stays sealed. You become untouchable, not because you never mess up, but because your mistakes never land. They fall sideways, on shoulders that are already bent, and the more they carry, the easier it is for you to stay upright. And maybe, just maybe, you believe it too. Maybe you've told the story so many times that you don't see the rewrites anymore. Maybe you've said, "It wasn't me," for so long that the mirror looks different now. But the reflection doesn't lie, and the hurt in someone else's eyes, that's the cost of every blame you passed along. So here you are, untouched, unmoved, while someone else lies awake wondering what they did wrong, confused, apologizing in their own head, rewriting their truth just to stay close to someone who refuses to hold any of their own flaws. That's the paradox of shifting blame. You stay clean by making others feel dirty, and the more they love you, the more they believe it's their mess to fix. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about making someone feel bad for doing what's best for them. Guilt tripping isn't yelling or begging. It's softer than that. It's disappointment dressed as love. It's quiet sighs, long silences, heavy stares. It's not, "You must do this." It's, "I didn't expect this from you." And that's the paradox. You're not forced to do anything, but somehow you can't say no. It works best on people with kind hearts, people who care, people who don't want to hurt anyone, the ones who think before they speak, the ones who double-check their tone, the ones who carry other people's feelings as if they're their own. That's what makes guilt so powerful. It doesn't break strong people. It uses their strength against them. You do something honest, something healthy, something you need, and they look at you like you've just betrayed them. They don't get angry. They get sad. They look hurt, and you feel like a monster, like your boundaries are selfish, like your no is cruel, not because it is, but because they made it look that way. They don't say you're wrong. They just say they're disappointed, that they would never do that to you. They remind you of everything they've done. They list the times they were there. They bring up sacrifices you didn't ask for. And now, your actions don't stand on their own. They stand in a courtroom filled with emotional debt. You were trying to protect your time, or your peace, or your truth, but now you feel like you're abandoning someone. You think, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I owe them this. Maybe I should have handled it differently. And that's how guilt rewrites your decision, not with facts, but with feelings. You start making choices not because they're right, but because they're safe, because they keep the peace, because they stop the silence. You call it kindness, but it's fear. Fear of being blamed, of being seen as cold, of being told you only think of yourself. That's the paradox. You're trying to do what's best for both of you, but guilt convinces you that both means them. And even when you do give in, it doesn't feel good. You feel drained, disconnected. You go along with something you didn't want, and they call it love. But you know it wasn't love. It was pressure. And the paradox deepens. They thank you for doing something that left you feeling smaller. They might not even know they're doing it. They might truly believe you're being unfair. They think they're holding you accountable. But guilt tripping isn't about honesty. It's about emotional leverage. It's not a conversation. It's a tug of war, one where your conscience is the rope. And the more you care, the tighter the rope pulls. You keep trying to explain yourself. You go back over every word, hoping they'll understand. But they don't want understanding. They want compliance. They don't want your truth. They want your surrender. And when you finally say yes, they relax. The weight lifts. They smile again, act normal, and you breathe out until the next time. Because guilt tripping is never a one-time trick. It's a pattern, a loop. You say no, they react, you feel bad, you change your mind, and the more it happens, the faster it works. It becomes internal. You guilt trip yourself. Before they even say a word, you imagine their disappointment, their reaction. You hear it in your head. And so you say yes before the guilt can even arrive. That's how deep it goes. You stop trusting your boundaries because they always come with a cost. And the worst part? You start to think you deserve the guilt, that maybe you really are selfish, that maybe taking care of yourself is wrong, but it isn't. You just forgot how to stand by your no without feeling like you're hurting someone, because guilt makes every boundary feel like a betrayal. Sometimes they use phrases like, "After everything I've done," or, "I guess I just don't matter anymore." And it cuts, not because it's true, but because you've worked so hard not to be that kind of person. You've tried to be fair, thoughtful, loyal, but guilt doesn't care about facts. It speaks directly to your heart and twists the good in it. They might say you've changed, that you used to be more caring, and suddenly your growth becomes proof that you're the problem, that your self-respect is coldness, that your independence is distance. You didn't pull away. They pushed, then blamed you for falling, and you try to explain, again and again. You try to be both strong and soft, but it never seems to land, because guilt is not about hearing the other person. It's about getting them to fold. And when you don't fold fast enough, the guilt thickens. You feel it in the air, in the pauses, in the way they sigh when you speak. And even when they get what they want, something inside you breaks. You feel resentful, not because you gave, but because you were tricked into it. Because they didn't ask with honesty. They asked with sadness, with history, with implication, and the weight of that is heavier than any request. But here's the quiet truth. Guilt only works if you're the kind of person who cares, and that means something powerful. It means you're not the problem. It means your conscience is working. It means your empathy is strong. You just forgot that boundaries can be kind too. They taught you that saying no is hurtful. But what's really hurtful is asking someone to betray themselves in the name of love. They made you feel like you had to choose between being good and being honest. But those two things aren't enemies. You can be both. You already are. So here you are, carrying guilt that never belonged to you, doing things out of pressure, then calling it love, and walking through life with a heart full of doubt simply because someone used your goodness as a tool. That's the paradox of guilt tripping. The kinder you are, the more likely you are to be manipulated, and the more you blame yourself when it happens. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about hurting someone and making them feel bad for noticing. Victim playing is the strategy of flipping the script. You start the fire, then act like you're the one burned. You cause the pain, then cry louder than the person you hurt. You take the role of the injured. not because you were wronged, but because it keeps you from being held accountable. And here's the paradox. The more damage you cause, the more sympathy you collect. It doesn't begin with blame. It begins with emotion, tears, shaky words, a hurt expression. The scene shifts, the focus moves. Now it's not about the harm that was done. It's about how the person who did it feels. They say, "I never meant to hurt you." And suddenly, you're the one apologizing for being hurt. You walk in with truth and walk out with guilt. That's the trick. That's the flip. That's the trap. They use vulnerability as armor. You try to explain your side, but they collapse in front of you. They tremble. They sigh. They break down. And you freeze, not because your feelings disappeared, but because compassion takes over. That's the paradox. You want to stand up for yourself, but you don't want to be cruel. So you step back. You go quiet. You make space. And in that space, the real story gets erased. They don't defend their actions. They defend their emotions. And since feelings are hard to argue with, you stop trying. You begin to comfort them. The one who caused harm now needs reassurance. You go from victim to caretaker, and just like that, the roles have reversed without anyone noticing. They might say things like, "I've always tried my best. Nobody understands how hard this is for me. I'm always the one getting attacked." And now your honesty feels like abuse. Your truth becomes too much. Your hurt becomes aggressive. You didn't raise your voice, but now you're the bully. Not because of how you acted, but because of how they looked while you said it. And if you push harder, if you try to get back to the facts, they shut down. This is why I can't talk to anyone. Everyone turns on me. I guess I just can't do anything right. And now you're not only hurting, you're defending yourself for trying to express that hurt. You start doubting the entire situation. Maybe you were too direct. Maybe you did overreact. Maybe they are the ones suffering. That's the trap. Victim playing makes you second-guess reality. It's not about truth. It's about narrative. They rewrite the scene, placing themselves in the center, surrounded by injustice. Not because they were wronged, but because being seen as innocent is more important than being honest. And the paradox deepens. The worse their behavior, the more fragile they act. The more blame they carry, the more broken they seem. They draw sympathy not from truth, but from performance. And if the performance is good enough, no one questions the script. Not even you. You walk away with a heart full of confusion. You wanted accountability, but ended up offering comfort. You feel guilty for asking for clarity. You feel mean for setting a boundary. And the one who should have said sorry now holds your apology in their hands. They don't need to be loud. They just need to be wounded. Because pain, even when faked, can silence logic. It can stop conversations. It can shut down reason. They don't argue to win. They break down to escape. And the softer they collapse, the harder it is for anyone to press the truth. It becomes a pattern. You bring up an issue, and they bring up their pain. You share your feelings, and they share their trauma. Not to connect, but to compete. You're not heard. You're out-suffered. And slowly you learn it's easier not to say anything at all. They say things like, "You have no idea what I've been through." And now, your hurt becomes irrelevant. You're not dealing with the current moment. You're stuck inside their past. You try to explain what just happened, but they're crying about something that happened 10 years ago, and you feel cruel for pulling them back to the present. They use pain as a shield. You try to reach them, but the wall is made of wounds. And every time you try to hold them accountable, you're told you're pressing too hard on a scar. You end up walking on emotional eggshells while your own needs go unmet. They don't change their behavior because the world keeps rewarding it. People gather around the one who looks broken, who sounds soft, who plays small, and you, the one who speaks up, starts looking big, loud, unfair, not because you're wrong, but because you're not performing pain well enough. And when others get involved, they don't hear what happened. They hear the story the victim player tells first, the edited version, the emotional angle. They say, "I tried so hard, and they just turned on me." And now you're not just managing their feelings, you're managing the reaction of everyone who believes them. You start hiding your truth. You stay silent. You smile when it hurts, because the alternative is being labeled heartless. You suppress your anger, not because it's wrong, but because they've taught you that only their emotions are allowed to take up space. Even when you know what they're doing, it still works, because you care. And the paradox is that your care becomes the rope. The more compassion you have, the easier it is to manipulate. They don't need to threaten you. They just need to make you feel like you're letting them down. And when they do apologize, it's never clean. It's wrapped in their own suffering. "I'm sorry, but I've just been under so much stress. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm just broken." So now your pain has been acknowledged, but it still points back to them. They say sorry, but you're the one who walks away feeling heavy. You didn't sign up to be the villain, but the more you stand your ground, the more they shape the story around your defiance. And the more gentle you are, the more they draw you in, twisting your kindness into a leash. So here you are, tired from being the strong one, guilty for needing honesty, silenced by sympathy, and standing across from someone who gets to break the rules, then cry when they're caught. That's the paradox of victim playing. The person who causes the most pain often ends up being comforted the most. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about being punished for doing exactly what you were told to do. Double binds are the traps with no exits. No matter what you choose, you lose. No matter how you respond, you're wrong. It's a setup where both options lead to blame, and trying to explain yourself just proves their point. And the paradox is cruel. You follow the rules and still break them. It starts simple. You're told to be honest, so you are. And they say you're too harsh. Next time, you hold back to be gentle, and they say you're hiding things. Speak up, and you're disrespectful. Stay quiet, and you're passive-aggressive. It's not about what you do. It's about making sure whatever you do can be used against you. The rules shift without warning. They say, "I want space," so you give them space, and then they say you're distant. They say, "Tell me how you feel," so you open up, and then they say you're making it about yourself. You try to listen. You try to learn. But every path circles back to failure. You live in constant tension, walking on a floor that changes shape with every step. Say yes, and you're weak. Say no, and you're selfish. Try to compromise, and they accuse you of playing both sides. You begin to ask yourself, before every action, what will upset them less? But the answer is always the same. Something will. And here's the trap within the trap. You start to feel like the problem, because if every choice you make leads to conflict, you assume you must be doing something wrong. You start doubting your instincts, second-guessing your motives. You try harder to get it right, even when the right answer keeps vanishing. They say they hate drama, but explode when you keep things simple. They say they value truth, but punish you when it's not flattering. They say, just be yourself, but criticize everything that makes you who you are. And the more you twist to please them, the more they call you inconsistent. You become exhausted from trying to solve an equation that was designed not to be solved. That's the paradox. It looks like a problem with an answer, but the problem is the question itself. You were never meant to succeed. You were meant to struggle. The struggle is the control, and they always stay above it, calm, smirking, confused by your confusion. Why are you so defensive? You're overthinking this. I never said you had to do that. They deny the bind while holding the ends of the rope, and the harder you fight, the more tangled you become. You try to explain, you show your effort, you walk them through your thinking. But explanations are turned into excuses. Clarity is labeled guilt. You're accused of playing victim, even while you're the one caught in the trap. Eventually, you stop trying to win. You just try not to lose as badly. You shrink. You avoid conflict. You become small and agreeable, not because you agree, but because you're tired of being wrong no matter what. And the paradox deepens. You lose your voice trying to avoid being silenced. It shows up everywhere. In love, in work, in family. Be strong and you're cold. Be soft and you're unstable. Set a boundary and you're controlling. Let things slide and you're enabling. The more you care, the more trapped you feel. Because caring means you keep trying. And trying means you keep getting hurt. And even when you think you figured it out, when you think you finally did the thing that won't backfire, it still does. They find something, a tone, a word, a delay, and suddenly you're back in the wrong. You're reminded that peace is not an option, only compliance. And even that doesn't work for long. You start to blame yourself for not seeing it sooner, for not walking away. But that's part of the bind too, because now you're stuck between two bad stories. Either you were naive or you were weak, and no matter which one you pick, you still lose a piece of your dignity. Some people use double binds on purpose, to confuse, to destabilize, to feel power. Others do it without knowing. They demand things they can't handle. They ask for honesty they don't want. They create tests they don't know they're giving. But either way, the result is the same. You're stuck. And the cruelest twist of all is when they say, "It's your choice," as if you're free, as if the bind is yours to untangle. But when every door leads to punishment, choice becomes an illusion. You're free to choose, but only if you're ready to be blamed for whatever happens next. And when you try to name the bind, to say, "This feels like a trap," they tell you you're paranoid, that you're reading into things, that you're twisting their words. They turn the bind into a ghost, invisible to everyone but you. And now, on top of being stuck, you feel crazy. But you're not crazy. You're reacting to chaos that was handed to you as if it were structure. You're trying to walk straight in a room where the walls keep moving. You're trying to be good in a place where good keeps being redefined. So here you are, tired, twisting, apologizing for breathing wrong, trying to meet expectations that change mid-sentence, and still hoping, somehow, that if you just choose the right words, the right tone, the right moment, you'll finally get it right. That's the paradox of the double bind. The harder you try to win, the deeper you sink. Because the game was never meant to be fair. It was only meant to keep you playing. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about tearing someone down while pretending to build them up. Identity undermining doesn't shout. It jokes. It teases. It smiles while it stings. It doesn't say, "You're nothing." It says, "You really like that stuff?" Or, "That's just so typical of you." It sounds like humor, but it feels like erosion. And here's the paradox. The smaller they make you feel, the more they say they're only trying to help. It begins where you're most open, your passions, your quirks, your choices. You share something you love, and they roll their eyes. You speak from your heart, and they laugh like you're trying too hard. It doesn't seem like an attack, but it leaves a mark. And the paradox is sharp. The more harmless the words sound, the deeper they cut. You start adjusting, not because you're changing, but because you don't want to be mocked. You mention your favorite music, and they say it's basic. You talk about your goals, and they call them unrealistic. You try something new, and they say it's not really you. Suddenly, you second-guess yourself in moments that used to feel natural. It's not loud enough to call out. It's not cruel enough to label abuse. But it's constant. You share, they shrink it. You shine, they dim it. And then they say, "I'm just being honest." You're too sensitive. Can't you take a joke? Now, not only are you hurt, you feel embarrassed for being hurt. That's the trick. That's the trap. That's how identity slowly breaks without anyone noticing. They don't need to destroy you. They just need to create doubt. A quiet hum in your mind that says, maybe I'm not that smart. Maybe I'm kind of annoying. Maybe I should tone it down. And the more you hear that voice, the more it sounds like your own. And here's where it twists even deeper. They often say they love you while doing it. I'm just trying to help you grow. You know I love you, but if I didn't care, I wouldn't bother saying anything. The wound comes wrapped in affection. That's what makes it so confusing. You're being hurt, but told it's for your own good. You stop noticing the pieces of yourself that have gone quiet, the clothes you stopped wearing, the books you stopped talking about, the laugh you softened, the ideas you shelved. You tell yourself you're evolving, that you're becoming more grounded, but you're not growing, you're shrinking to fit their comfort. And when you try to push back, when you say, that hurt, they deflect, they act shocked. I can't say anything around you anymore. You're taking this way too personally. Now your defense becomes the next problem, and the original harm gets buried under your reaction to it. The paradox is cold. The more you try to hold on to who you are, the more they say you're being dramatic. But if you let go, they say you've changed. You can't win. You're either too much or not enough, too sensitive or too distant. You spend your energy balancing on a line that keeps moving. Sometimes it's wrapped in comparison. Why can't you be more like him? She would have handled this better. Most people your age already figured this out. You hear it often enough, and you start measuring yourself by other people's lives. You forget that your worth isn't built from someone else's approval. And slowly, the way you describe yourself changes. You go from, I love this, to, it's just a silly thing I like. From, this is who I am, to, I don't know anymore. You apologize before you speak. You laugh when you don't think something's funny. You explain yourself even when no one asked. Not because you're weak, but because you've been told, over and over, that your natural self is a little off. And when you look in the mirror, you don't see flaws. You see echoes of the words they've dropped like stones into your reflection. And somehow, even when they're not in the room, you hear them, not as insults, but as thoughts. And that's the worst part. You start to do the work for them. You edit yourself before they have the chance to comment. You avoid bringing up the thing you love before they can roll their eyes. You feel embarrassed for simply being who you are. And the paradox is brutal. You protect yourself from someone you still believe is trying to protect you. It doesn't always come from hate. Sometimes it comes from their insecurity, their need to feel smarter, more grounded, more in control. But your identity shouldn't have to shrink for someone else to feel big. Love should make you more of who you are, not less. But when someone chips away at your identity, they make you easier to control, less likely to argue, less confident in your voice, more afraid to be wrong, more eager to be accepted. And when you rely on their approval to feel whole, they never need to raise their voice to keep you in place. And even when they compliment you, it feels strange, like they're surprised. Wow, that was actually pretty good. You really pulled that off. Didn't expect that from you. It's praise with a shadow, a backhanded nod that reminds you of the box they think you belong in. But here's the truth beneath it all. They saw your light, and instead of letting it shine, they dimmed it, because it reminded them of something they lost, or never had, or didn't understand. And instead of growing beside you, they pulled you down to make sure they wouldn't be left behind. So here you are, a little quieter, a little more confused, carrying pieces of yourself you're not sure are allowed anymore, wondering when the version of you that felt whole started fading, and still trying to believe that the person doing the damage might actually care. That's the paradox of identity undermining. They shape you by shaming you, then say they love the person you've become, even though you had to lose yourself to become it. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about breaking someone down by claiming you're just trying to help them be better. Incessant criticism is a slow erosion. It doesn't crush all at once. It chips away piece by piece. A look here, a sigh there, a comment about how you could have done it differently, or better, or faster, or with more care. And the paradox is this: the more you try to improve, the more they find to fix. It's disguised as feedback, as honesty, as just being real. They say they're trying to help, but the help never feels helpful. It feels like pressure, like tension, like something heavy is always sitting on your chest. They tell you it's constructive, but it never builds. It only breaks. They point out your mistakes every day, every moment. They remind you of the thing you forgot, the word you misused, the tone you didn't mean to have, the tiny detail you missed. And at first, you try to listen. You nod, you take it in, you believe them when they say it's about growth. But then it keeps going, and going, and going. You fix one thing, and they point to another. You apologize, and they say you're making excuses. You try to explain, and they accuse you of being defensive. You stay quiet, and they say you're shutting down. No matter what you do, there's always something wrong. That's the trap. You become the problem, even when you're doing your best. And it doesn't always sound angry. Sometimes it's soft, calm, even polite. You always leave that cabinet open. You didn't answer that text very well. You know, that outfit doesn't really flatter you. It's small, but constant. And the small things are what stick. They add up. And suddenly, you're questioning everything. At first, you feel like you can handle it. You want to do better. You want to prove you're listening. So you adjust. You try harder. You walk more carefully, speak more slowly, triple-check your work. But the paradox kicks in. Your effort increases, and so does their criticism. The more energy you give, the more they take. Eventually, you stop feeling proud of anything. You could do 100 things right, and they'll point to the one thing that could have been better. You finish a task, and their response is, finally. You express a thought, and they interrupt. You try to relax, and they tell you you're being lazy. You live on edge, not because you're sensitive, but because you've been trained to expect correction at any moment. And they never let you settle. Even in quiet moments, there's tension. You start anticipating their reaction before they speak. You rehearse answers in your head. You scan your environment for things you might have missed. Your body stays tight, your brain always braced. Not because there's danger, but because criticism has replaced peace. They say they want you to be your best, but your best is never enough. And that's the paradox. Improvement doesn't silence the critique. It feeds it. Because if you can improve, they'll find more you haven't yet. You're not praised for effort. You're punished for not being perfect. And if you try to speak up, to say the constant comments are hurting, you're met with denial. I'm just trying to help. You're too sensitive. I can't say anything without you getting upset. Now your pain becomes part of the problem. You're not just wrong in what you do. You're wrong in how you feel about it. They never take responsibility for the weight they're putting on you. They call it guidance. And if they do apologize, it's hollow. Sorry, but I just expect a lot. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. But the behavior never stops. The words keep coming, and the pressure stays. You begin to forget what confidence feels like. You forget what it's like to finish something without immediately hearing a flaw. You forget what it's like to enjoy a moment without the voice in your head reminding you that you should have done something differently. Their voice becomes your voice. Their criticism becomes your inner dialogue. You stop taking risks. You stop speaking up. You stop trying new things. Not because you don't want to, but because you're scared of the commentary. You feel trapped in a loop of not enough, and the harder you try to escape it, the more trapped you become. That's the paradox. You're trying to win back a sense of worth that their words keep stealing. Even when they're not around, you hear them. You see their face in your mind when you make a mistake. You imagine their tone when you take a break. You start to carry them with you everywhere, not out of love, but out of fear. You've been trained to seek their approval while never receiving it. And when someone else compliments you, you doubt it. You think they must not know the real you, because the real you is flawed, always missing something, always falling short. You believe what the critic has said more than what anyone else might say. Because they said it often, they said it like it was truth, but it wasn't truth. It was control. Disguised as concern, it was insecurity. Disguised as standards, it was harm. Disguised as help. They weren't making you better. They were making you unsure of your mind, of your voice, of your worth. And here's the hardest truth. You were never the problem. You just forgot that because they kept pointing at you until you couldn't see anything else. So here you are, walking carefully, thinking slowly, trying not to trigger another critique and calling that growth, calling that discipline, when really it's just survival. That's the paradox of incessant criticism. They claim to be sharpening you, but all they're really doing is wearing you down. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about controlling someone by making sure everyone else is watching. Public humiliation doesn't just target someone's actions, it targets their dignity. It doesn't correct behavior quietly. It turns correction into a performance, a lesson, a warning. It's not about fixing something, it's about showing everyone who's in charge. And the paradox is this. They say they're addressing a problem, but they're really creating fear. It starts with a comment, a call out in front of others, maybe a joke with a sharp edge, maybe a question you're not ready to answer. Everyone hears it. Some people laugh, some people look away. You freeze, not because you don't have something to say, but because you didn't expect to be put on display. They say it's just teasing, just honesty, just feedback, but it's not. It's calculated. It's timed. They wait until the eyes are on you, until you're in a group, until your reaction is trapped between pride and panic. If you defend yourself, you look defensive. If you stay quiet, you look guilty. And the paradox hits. You lose, no matter how you respond. You try to recover. You smile. You laugh a little. You say something to brush it off, but it stays. You feel your face warm, your body stiffen, your mind race. You're not just embarrassed, you're exposed, and that exposure lives longer than the moment. It plants something in you, a kind of caution. You remember the sting, the sound of your name being used as a punchline, the way they emphasized your mistake. Not because it was important, but because it was visible. They don't want to talk, they want to demonstrate. And you're the example. After that, you walk differently, speak more carefully, second guess before you share. You stay out of focus, not because you don't want to contribute, but because you don't want to be targeted. That's the quiet success of public shame. It doesn't just silence you in the moment, it rewires how you show up. And the person who did it walks away looking strong, confident, in control. Maybe they even earn laughs, applause, approval. People respect them because they say it like it is, because they hold people accountable. But it's not accountability, it's dominance through spectacle. And if you bring it up, if you say it hurt, they say you're too sensitive, that you're making a big deal out of nothing, that they didn't mean it like that. Now your reaction becomes the next target. Your discomfort becomes the new punchline, and the real issue disappears behind your need to calm down. They say it was a joke, but jokes don't feel like humiliation. They say it was a lesson, but lessons don't require an audience. They say it was necessary, but necessary things don't leave people feeling small. That's the paradox. They use the language of growth to justify a tool of control. And the more often it happens, the more predictable it becomes. You learn to anticipate it. You lower your head when they start talking. You laugh along so you're not left behind. You try to make yourself invisible, not because you lack confidence, but because they've taught you visibility is dangerous. Other people see it too, but most stay quiet. Not because they agree, but because they're relieved it's not them. That's how public humiliation works. It doesn't just wound the target, it warns the crowd. It says, step out of line, and this could be you. It keeps everyone obedient, not through respect, but through fear. And fear is sticky. It stays with you long after the group has moved on, after the meeting ends, after the class is over, after the laughter fades. You sit alone and replay it. The tone, the words, the way people looked at you, and you ask yourself what you did to deserve it. But here's the truth. You didn't deserve it. You weren't corrected. You were used. Your mistake became a message. Your discomfort became entertainment. Your voice was turned into a cautionary tale. And the more you try to act like it didn't hurt, the more it hurts. And maybe the person who did it doesn't see it that way. Maybe they think they're just being bold, that they're keeping it real, that they're toughening you up. But there's a difference between being honest and being cruel, between addressing a problem and turning someone into a prop. And if they do see what they're doing, then it's worse, because it means they know exactly how shame works, how it silences people, how it creates loyalty through fear, how it makes people easier to manage, not because they trust you, but because they're scared of being embarrassed again. You begin to hide not just mistakes, but emotions. You don't admit confusion. You don't ask questions. You don't take risks, not because you've lost interest, but because you've learned that one misstep could cost your pride in front of a room. And the irony is this: humiliation doesn't create better performance. It creates paralysis. It doesn't produce respect. It produces silence. It doesn't build trust. It builds resentment. But the paradox is that it still works. Because people do fall in line. They do stay quiet. They do shrink. And sometimes people laugh with them, not because it's funny, but because laughing is safer than being the next target. The room becomes a place where people trade honesty for safety, where authenticity is replaced with strategy, and everyone learns how to play along. So here you are, remembering what it felt like, that moment where everything slowed down, where all the attention you didn't ask for landed on you. And now you carry that moment like a warning sign. You learn when to speak, when to fade, when to nod, when to disappear. That's the paradox of public humiliation. They call it leadership, but it's fear in a suit. They call it teaching, but it's control with a spotlight. They say it's honesty, but it's really just performance, and you were never meant to be part of the act. You were meant to be the stage. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about creating agreement by pretending it already exists. False consensus is the act of making something feel true just because it sounds like everyone believes it. You don't prove your point. You just say it loudly, confidently, casually, like it's common knowledge, like it's already been decided. And the paradox is, people begin to agree, not because they believe, but because they don't want to be the only one who doesn't. It works by creating an invisible crowd. We all think so. Everyone knows that. Nobody actually believes that stuff. Those words don't invite discussion. They shut it down. Because now, to disagree isn't just to have a different opinion. It's to stand alone. And standing alone feels risky. So people nod, not because they agree, but because they don't want to be cast as the outsider. False consensus doesn't need truth. It just needs volume. It uses phrases that sound safe. Let's be honest. Clearly, it's obvious. And with every confident statement, it becomes harder to question, because the moment you do, the room shifts. Eyes turn, the silence thickens, and suddenly, you're not debating an idea. You're challenging a crowd that may not even be real. That's the twist. The crowd often doesn't exist. Most people are silent, neutral, unsure. But in the presence of false consensus, their silence gets hijacked. It gets turned into agreement. No one speaks up, so it must mean they agree. But silence isn't consent. It's caution, fear, uncertainty. And the paradox is, the less people talk, the more powerful the illusion becomes. You sit there thinking, am I the only one who feels this way? And that thought keeps you quiet. You don't want to be wrong. You don't want to be mocked. You don't want to be labeled difficult. So you play along. You nod. You stay quiet. And now you've become part of the illusion too. You've added to the silence that looks like agreement. It becomes a cycle. One person speaks with confidence, and no one pushes back, so they get louder, more sure, more absolute. And each time the group stays silent, the illusion hardens, until the false consensus feels real, feels normal, feels like truth, even though no one actually asked, is this what we all believe? And if someone does question it, they're immediately isolated. Wow, you're the only one who thinks that? That's a strange take. Nobody agrees with that. And now, the dissenter isn't just disagreeing, they're breaking the unspoken rule. They're the reason the illusion cracks, and that makes them a threat. You start to see the pressure, not from force, but from suggestion, not from truth, but from appearance. And the more it continues, the more you understand the paradox. Conformity can be created out of nothing, just by making people afraid to speak. False consensus creates control through comfort. It makes people feel like they're part of something. Even if that something doesn't really exist, people stop thinking. They start repeating. They mirror the loudest voice, not because it's wise, but because it's safe. It's used everywhere, in friend groups, in families, in teams, in politics. A single phrase repeated often enough becomes the assumed belief. Everybody knows that's the best way. We all agree on this. You're not one of those people, right? Now you're cornered, not by facts, but by the fear of exclusion. And the strangest part is, the person claiming the consensus might be the only one who actually believes it, but they don't need backup. They just need to sound like they have it. That's how control is created without questions, without data, without proof, just confidence and repetition. It's a spotlight turned toward the dissenters. It says, you're the strange one. And that's a heavy thing to carry, because humans are wired for belonging. We want connection. We want to be seen as normal, as accepted, as safe. And false consensus uses that desire to silence our inner truth. So you compromise. You stay quiet when you know better. You don't challenge ideas you disagree with. You laugh when something feels wrong. And over time, you feel smaller, less honest. You forget the difference between agreeing and complying. You lose sight of your own voice because it's been buried under the illusion of everyone else's. And the paradox grows deeper, because now you're helping spread the illusion that made you shrink. You're becoming part of the crowd that never existed. And the longer it goes on, the more real it feels. Not because it is real, but because it's been repeated so many times. And when someone finally stands up and says, actually, I don't agree, the room shifts. People freeze. But then something surprising happens. Others start nodding, quietly, carefully. You realize you were never alone. Others felt it too. They were just waiting for someone else to speak first. That's the hidden truth behind the paradox. The silence doesn't mean agreement. It means fear. It means hesitation. It means people are checking the room, wondering if it's safe to be honest. And once someone breaks the illusion, the spell cracks. But most of the time, it never gets broken. Most of the time, the false consensus stays. Not because people believe, but because they're afraid to not believe out loud. And the person who created it walks with power they didn't earn. They lead with a following they don't actually have. So, here you are, surrounded by nodding heads, wondering if anyone else is thinking what you're thinking, watching someone speak like they already have the answer, and knowing that if you speak up, the spell might break, but so might your comfort. That's the paradox of false consensus. The more it's believed, the less true it becomes, and the more dangerous it feels to question. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about getting what you want by saying someone more important already agrees with you. Appeal to authority doesn't try to prove a point. It skips that part entirely. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It just points up. It says, "They said so," and suddenly the conversation ends. You're not allowed to question anymore, because now questioning them means questioning something bigger. And the paradox is this: the person using power might not have any of their own. It starts with names. My boss agrees. Experts say. That's just how things are done. It sounds official. It sounds settled. But when you look closer, you realize there's no detail, no quote, no real explanation, just the shadow of authority held up like a shield. And the moment you try to ask, who exactly, or where does it say that, the person dodges, or they get annoyed, because the illusion only works when it goes unquestioned. Sometimes the authority is real, a title, a position, a rank, but even then, it's misused. It's not, I believe this. It's, you have to believe this because someone higher said so. And now, instead of having a conversation, you're being managed. The voice you're arguing with isn't even in the room, but it's being used like a weapon anyway. Sometimes the authority doesn't even exist. It's made up, or twisted, or taken out of context, but it doesn't matter, because as long as it sounds official, it becomes powerful. Studies show. Everyone in leadership agrees. I've talked to people who know what they're doing. Vague, confident, untouchable, and completely empty. And here's the twist. The more uncertain someone is, the more they rely on borrowed power. They can't stand alone, so they stand behind someone else. They dress up their opinion like a fact. They cover their manipulation with credentials. They turn personal pressure into public truth. And now, you're not pushing back on a person. You're pushing back on the system, the rules, the experts, the big names, the structure, and that makes you feel small, wrong, arrogant, like you're the fool for even asking. That's the paradox. You're being manipulated, but made to feel like you're the one not listening. You're the one out of line. You need to trust the chain of command, even when that chain has no links. It shows up everywhere. Therapists say people like you have issues. The pastor says this is the right way. I talked to someone who's been through this, and they agree with me. You're not arguing with them anymore. You're arguing with their puppet, and the puppet always wins. And when you finally say, I don't agree, they don't engage with your point. They attack your character. So you think you know better than them? You're not qualified to speak on this. Don't you trust people who've studied it longer than you? Now your thoughts are invalid, not because they're wrong, but because you don't have the right title. That's how control is passed around. Not by force, but by hierarchy. And the person at the top doesn't even need to know they're being used. They're just the name, the weight, the reason you're supposed to stay silent. It makes people obedient without question. It makes disagreement look disrespectful. It turns the idea of thinking for yourself into rebellion, because now it's not about right and wrong. It's about loyalty, about respect, about staying in your place. And if you don't, you're seen as dangerous. You stop questioning, not because you agree, but because you're tired. You don't want to argue with someone who keeps pointing to the sky. You don't want to fight shadows, so you nod, you follow, you obey. Not because it makes sense, but because you're told you're not allowed to know better. And if you ever ask for proof, for a real quote, for the actual rule, they say you're being difficult, disrespectful, complicated. Why can't you just trust the process? Why do you always need to argue? Now your curiosity is an offense, your thinking is the problem, your clarity is framed as pride. You might even start to feel guilty, like you're arrogant for wanting answers, like you're rebellious for needing things to make sense. And the paradox hits again. You're the one being manipulated, but somehow you're the one who feels wrong. And even if the authority figure they're pointing to is real, that doesn't make them right. Authority doesn't mean infallibility. Experts get it wrong. Leaders make mistakes. Power doesn't equal truth. But that's the illusion. The higher the title, the less people feel allowed to question. So here you are, being told what to think by someone who won't even claim the idea as their own, being pushed around by invisible hands, being judged by rules that were never explained. And the more you push back, the more they hide behind borrowed voices. Sometimes people do this because they're insecure. They want to win without doing the work, so they climb onto the shoulders of someone else and shout from there. Other times, it's intentional, a strategy, a way to silence opposition before it starts. Either way, the effect is the same. They gain power by claiming they already have it. But real authority doesn't need to be borrowed. Real wisdom doesn't need a title to back it up. Real leadership listens. It explains. It meets you where you are. It doesn't hide behind other names. It stands on its own. And that's how you spot the difference. So the next time someone says, "Because they said so," ask who, ask when, ask why. Not because you're trying to be difficult, but because truth should never need to hide behind a name. That's the paradox of appeal to authority. The less power they have, the more power they pretend someone else gave them. And the more you question it, the more they act like you've committed a crime just by thinking for yourself. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about controlling someone by making them feel like they're saving you. Emotional blackmail isn't loud. It doesn't come with a lock or a threat of violence, not against you anyway. It's softer, slower, more dangerous in disguise. It says, "If you do this, I'll fall apart. If you leave, I'll never recover. If you say no, I don't know what I'll do." It sounds like fear, but it's control. And here's the paradox. The person being hurt ends up apologizing to the one doing the hurting. It starts with a look, a pause, a fragile voice. They don't demand, they crumble. They don't shout, they tremble. And suddenly, the room is filled with tension you didn't create, but now you're the only one who can fix. You didn't ask to carry their pain, but now you're holding it. And every move you make is tied to the idea that if you let go, something terrible will happen. They say things like, "You're the only one who understands me. I can't live without you. If you really loved me, you'd stay." And even though they never say the exact words, the message is clear. Your choice determines their survival. And that's the trap. That's the pressure. That's the lie that feels like truth. Because now, your choices aren't really choices. Saying no isn't an option anymore. It's a trigger. Setting a boundary isn't self-care. It's selfish. Leaving isn't a breakup. It's betrayal. You don't walk away, you escape. And every time you try to breathe, they remind you how fragile they are, how broken, how much they need you. But they don't want your love. They want your fear. The paradox sharpens. You're not staying because you want to. You're staying because you're afraid of what they'll do if you don't. And yet somehow, they call it love. They say you're meant to be. They say no one else would ever care this much. But love doesn't come with chains. Love doesn't come with threats dressed as desperation. And sometimes it's not even about self-harm. It's guilt. It's emotional sabotage. It's reminders of everything they've done for you. After all I gave you, this is how you treat me. I guess I never really mattered. You'll regret this when I'm gone. And now the pain is yours. But not because you earned it, because it was handed to you like a weapon, blade first. You stop making choices for yourself. You start walking through every day carefully, checking every word, every tone, every message, making sure you don't become the trigger for their next breakdown. And you tell yourself it's kindness, that you're helping, that you're being the strong one. But the paradox cuts deeper. You're not being kind. You're being held hostage by someone who knows exactly which part of your heart to pull. And they may truly be hurting. They may really be afraid. But fear doesn't give someone the right to trap another person in it. Pain doesn't give permission to manipulate. Struggling doesn't excuse control. And that's where emotional blackmail hides best, behind sympathy. Because you feel sorry for them, you stop seeing the damage they're doing to you. You don't speak up. You don't say no. You start losing pieces of yourself slowly, trading them for moments of peace. And even then, peace never lasts, because their pain keeps coming back. And every time it does, you're expected to fix it. Not as a partner, not as a friend, but as a lifeline. You weren't built to be someone's lifeline. You were never supposed to carry someone else's survival on your back. And still, here you are, canceling plans, sacrificing sleep, ignoring your gut, saying yes when you mean no, all because you don't want to be the reason they fall. They've built a world where your strength is the only thing keeping them from breaking. And the more you care, the more trapped you become. You can't leave. You can't step away. You can't breathe without hearing, "What will happen to me if you go?" So you stay, not because of connection, but because of threat. And that's the darkest paradox. They don't have to hurt you to hurt you. They just have to say they'll hurt themselves. They don't need a weapon, just your conscience. Your empathy becomes their tool. And even if you try to explain, if you say, "This isn't fair," they cry harder. They crumble. They turn the lights low. They stop eating. They talk in circles. They hint at endings. And your fear kicks in. You forget everything you felt. You just want them safe. But in keeping them safe, you're losing yourself. People around you may not even see it, because it doesn't look like control. It looks like weakness, like sadness, like someone who's barely holding on. And you become the hero in their story, the one who stays, the one who saves, the one who never gives up. But heroes break too, especially when they're never allowed to rest. And sometimes you do try to leave. You take a step back, you make space, and then the threats come faster. Fine, I'll just disappear. I'll never talk to anyone again. You'll see how much you mattered when it's too late. And suddenly, the space you made is filled with panic. You didn't want to hurt them, but they've made sure you feel like you already did. So you go back, you check in, you soften your tone, you say you're sorry, and once again, you're holding their pain like it's your fault. That's the loop. That's the prison. That's how emotional blackmail becomes a cage that looks like compassion. You might even believe it's love, that this kind of intensity means something, that the chaos means depth, that the threats mean connection. But love doesn't trap. Love doesn't test. Love doesn't hold someone's peace hostage just to keep them close. So here you are, not sure where you end and they begin, carrying a weight you didn't choose, making decisions based on their fear instead of your truth, and feeling guilty not because you did anything wrong, but because someone told you their world would collapse if you ever chose yourself. That's the paradox of emotional blackmail. They control you by acting like they're the ones falling apart, when in reality, you're the one breaking, just to keep them whole. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is about making something feel rare, so you stop thinking and start chasing. Scarcity illusion doesn't rely on truth. It relies on panic. It says, Only a few people get this. This is your last chance. If you don't act now, it's gone forever. It doesn't make the thing more valuable. It makes you feel less secure. And the paradox is, the more pressure you feel, the more you believe you're making a free choice. It begins with a timer, a deadline, a spot that could disappear, a look that says, you better move. You're told this opportunity won't come again. And even if you were unsure, even if you were about to walk away, now you freeze, now you reconsider, now you think, maybe I'll regret missing this. That's how scarcity illusion works. It puts a countdown in your head. You stop weighing your options. You stop asking questions. You start reacting fast, without clarity. And they call that confidence. But it's not confidence. It's urgency wrapped in fear. It's not just used to sell things. It's used to sell people, relationships, loyalty, agreement. No one else will love you like this. People like us don't come around often. This is a once-in-a-lifetime kind of connection. And suddenly, you start ignoring red flags. You stop noticing how strange it feels, because they've made you believe this is rare, and rare means worth keeping. You hear the word exclusive, and it triggers something. You think it means special, but it really just means limited. And when something is limited, it makes you feel like you're lucky to have even been considered, so you accept terms you normally wouldn't. You tolerate behaviors you wouldn't excuse, because if it's rare, it must be right. And here's the twist. Scarcity illusion doesn't actually require the thing to be rare. It just has to look that way. A product with artificial limits, a relationship with fake urgency, a favor that comes with a time limit. It's not the thing that's rare. It's the window they create around it. And the moment you believe that window is closing, you rush through it. You don't ask, do I need this? You ask, will I lose it? The question shifts. The fear grows. The choice disappears. That's the paradox. Scarcity doesn't create value, it creates anxiety. And anxiety makes you obey faster than logic ever could. You might notice it. You might sense that something's off. But by the time you do, you've already said yes. You've already committed. You already feel invested. And now, turning back feels like failure, like missing out, like regret. So you keep going, not because it feels right, but because you're scared of what might happen if you stop. They don't have to convince you. They just have to say, there's not much left. And suddenly, you're listening. You're leaning in. You're acting fast. Even if your gut says wait, your brain says move, because the illusion is strong, and it doesn't need proof. It just needs urgency. You see it everywhere. Only 3 seats left. Doors close at midnight. You'll never get this chance again. It makes you feel like you're on the edge of something big, and if you step away, you'll lose everything. But what you're actually losing is peace, space, time to think. Even in relationships, this shows up quietly. Someone tells you that they don't wait, that others are already lined up, that if you hesitate, they're gone. And now, your decision isn't about what feels good. It's about what feels scary. You chase not because you want it, but because they've made you afraid not to. Scarcity illusion turns attention into control. It uses timing as a trap. And once you step inside, you stop trusting your own rhythm. You start syncing with someone else's urgency, their pace, their pressure, and they never slow down, because slowing down gives you time to see through it. And the strange part is, sometimes we like the pressure. It makes things feel exciting, important, alive. Scarcity adds adrenaline to the mix. It creates a rush, and rush feels like purpose, even when it isn't. So we buy things we don't need. We stay in places we don't like. We agree to things that make us uncomfortable, not because they're right, but because they won't be available forever. And the paradox deepens. You're no longer deciding what's best for you. You're just trying not to miss out. Fear of missing out becomes stronger than the fear of being wrong. You think, I can always leave later, or at least I didn't let it pass me by. But some things, once taken, don't leave so easily. Some choices, once made quickly, take a long time to undo. And the person creating the illusion, they know this. They rely on it. They know if they let you think too long, you might change your mind. So they don't give you that luxury. They fill the space with countdowns, with scarcity, with fear, and call it opportunity. And even when you realize what's happening, it's hard to walk away. Because by then, the idea has been planted. What if this is the best you'll ever get? That thought haunts you. Not because it's true, but because it was whispered at just the right moment. You begin to doubt your standards. You question your timing. You wonder if you're being too careful, too slow, too afraid. But you were never afraid of the thing. You were afraid of the pressure surrounding it. So here you are, caught in a moment that feels like it matters more than it does, making decisions faster than you ever planned, ignoring your gut because the clock is ticking, and believing that if you don't act now, you'll never get another chance. That's the paradox of scarcity illusion. They make something feel rare so that you stop treating yourself like you're valuable too. Because if you knew your worth, you'd never rush to catch something that has to trick you into chasing it. The identity erosion method. You don't break someone by attacking them head on. You do it by subtly dismantling their identity, one brick at a time. Here's how. Begin with harmless corrections. You always misremember dates. You've told that story differently before. That's not how it happened, is it? Each time you act surprised, empathetic, non-threatening. The goal? Create a crack between what they think is true and what you're telling them. Once they begin to doubt their own memory, their grip on identity loosens. Then escalate. Question their likes, habits, beliefs. Frame it as concern. You used to love that band. Why don't you anymore? You've really changed? Are you sure you're okay? You're not acting like yourself lately. What's happening beneath the surface is terrifying. Their brain is constantly seeking coherence. When reality becomes unstable, people look outward for cues, and you've positioned yourself as the only stable mirror they trust. Eventually, they'll begin asking you for guidance, for clarity, for definition. You've eroded their foundation and offered yourself as the new one. It's not control through fear. It's control through disorientation. They won't even realize what they've lost because you've convinced them it was never really theirs to begin with. The guilt transfusion. You can make someone feel guilty without ever accusing them of anything. You just have to bleed it out slowly. First, play the martyr. Over-deliver. Be generous. Give help they never asked for. Make sacrifices they didn't see coming. Then, when they least expect it, withdraw. Don't lash out. Don't explain. Just go quiet. Make your absence loud. They'll start to feel it, the imbalance, the discomfort. Guilt needs no words, just a sudden shift in emotional pressure, and now their mind starts hunting for a reason. Did I do something wrong? Why are they acting distant? I owe them, don't I? Once guilt sets in, the leash forms. Now you drip subtle reminders of your efforts. It's okay. I'm just used to doing things alone. Or, don't worry, I don't expect much from people anymore. Each sentence injects more guilt, and guilt is sticky. It sticks to decisions, to behavior, to boundaries. People will bend to you just to balance the emotional scale, without realizing it was you who loaded the scale to begin with. This is psychological warfare by emotional gravity. You become the planet. They become the orbit. Used coldly, it's manipulation. Used consistently, it's domination. The controlled chaos principle. Most people crave predictability. They want to know where they stand, what tomorrow looks like, who they're dealing with. That's where this tactic strikes. You disrupt their sense of stability by creating patterned unpredictability. One day, you're kind. The next, cold. You respond to texts instantly, then disappear for hours. You praise them privately and criticize them subtly in public. You shift tones mid-conversation, make promises, then act like they never existed. This constant shifting emotional climate causes a deep psychological effect. They become addicted to your approval. Because every time you offer warmth or kindness, it feels like relief, like a hit of oxygen in a suffocating room. The brain starts chasing that relief. It begins to work for it, desperately. This is what abusive relationships are built on. This is what cults master. It's emotional casino logic. Random rewards paired with unpredictable punishment. You don't know when the slot machine pays out, but you keep pulling the lever. Over time, the target stops questioning the chaos. They adjust to it, normalize it, and suddenly their emotional thermostat is tuned to your behavior, not their own. You've hacked their stability reflex. And now, they won't feel right unless you say they are. The authority mirage. You don't need real power to control people. You just need to look like you have it. This tactic is about crafting the illusion of expertise, leadership, or inside access, so others instinctively defer to you. It starts with confidence, not arrogance, certainty. You speak in facts, not guesses. You never say, I think, only this is. Add props, subtle ones, a clipboard, a headset, a lanyard. People obey symbols more than logic. Want someone to move? Say, we're clearing this area for safety. No explanation needed. Just act as if you've said it 100 times before. Now escalate. Drop names. Reference fake systems. It's policy. They want this done fast. Say it like you're part of an invisible they that holds weight. The result? People stop questioning and start following. Their minds hand over the reins to perceived authority, especially in unfamiliar or high-pressure situations. This trick works in crowds, in workplaces, in relationships. People would rather trust someone who seems in control than challenge someone who might be. But the true power lies not in command, but in belief. Once people believe you have the power, they behave as if you do. And then, you do. Unknown user. Welcome to the first paradoxes. Let's start with a simple yet mind-bending question. What if the more you trust your own mind, the more likely it is that you're wrong? Gaslighting is the art of breaking reality while pretending it's still whole. It's not just lying. It's lying in a way that makes you question whether the truth was ever real in the first place. And here's the paradox. The better it works, the more invisible it becomes. The more effective the gaslighter, the less you believe they exist. You become your own gaslighter without realizing it. Now hold on. How can someone control your mind using your own mind against you? That's where it gets twisted. A person tells you something didn't happen. You know it did. But they insist, calmly, repeatedly. Maybe they even smile. They ask if you're feeling okay. They ask if you're tired, if you might have mixed things up. Not to harm you, oh no. They're just concerned. You start to doubt, just a flicker. But flickers can become fires. Because here's the loop. The more you second-guess your memory, the more you look to others for confirmation. And the more you do that, the more power they have over what's real for you. That's the core paradox of gaslighting. The victim begins to doubt not only what's true, but the fact that truth can be known. You no longer argue with the gaslighter. You argue with yourself. The gaslighter can go silent. They've already infected your mind. Now look at this. Gaslighting only works when the victim is sane. If someone truly was irrational, unstable, or delusional, it wouldn't matter what the gaslighter said. But because the victim is clear-headed and logical, they keep trying to make sense of what's happening. They try to reconcile what they saw with what they're being told. In other words, The smarter you are, the more vulnerable you become. That's the paradox. Intelligence doesn't protect you. It helps destroy you faster because your brain starts helping the gaslighter. A lie told once is just a lie, but a lie told again and again, paired with the right tone, a steady gaze, a little feigned concern, becomes something stranger. It becomes doubt. The paradox is that certainty gets weaker the more it's challenged, not by stronger evidence, but by calmer denial. Someone says, "That didn't happen." You say, "Yes, it did." They shake their head gently. "Are you sure?" they ask. You say, "I remember it." They say, "You've been stressed lately, haven't you?" Now you're not defending a memory. You're defending your sanity. Truth is supposed to be strong, but gaslighting shows truth is fragile. You thought truth was hard like steel, but it's soft like smoke. It can be bent and reshaped by nothing more than confidence. That's what makes gaslighting work. It doesn't erase reality. It just asks you to doubt it. That's all it takes. And here's another paradox. The more someone gaslights you, the more you feel guilty. You feel like you're the one doing harm by insisting something happened. You start to apologize. You start to soften your words. You start to say, "Maybe I misunderstood," even though deep down, you didn't. You bend not because you're wrong, but because you're tired. That's the twist. Truth doesn't break with force. It breaks with exhaustion. It gets worse. If someone tells you something false and you catch it, you feel strong. You say, "That's not true." But if they respond by acting like they're hurt, like you are being unkind, now you're the villain for protecting reality. The paradox is that you defend truth and end up feeling cruel for doing it. You tell someone, "That happened," and they say, "Why are you being so hostile?" Now you're explaining your tone, not the event. The focus has shifted. You're off balance. The truth is buried, not in lies, but in emotions. And here's where it flips entirely. You can start gaslighting yourself without anyone in the room. You walk into a moment of confusion and automatically assume it's your fault. You forget where you place something and instantly think, "I'm losing it." You feel upset and immediately tell yourself you're overreacting. Not because it's true, but because that pattern has been carved into your mind. You no longer need the gaslighter. Their voice has become your own. How can something be both invisible and destructive? How can something so simple, denying a fact, cause someone to feel like they're falling apart? That's the gaslighting paradox. The less you notice it, the more it works. The more you resist it, the guiltier you feel. The more you fight it, the more you're blamed. Reality becomes something you can't touch, but are still punished for not understanding. Gaslighting doesn't work with force. It works with softness. Not screaming, but whispering. Not fists, but sighs. And that's what makes it harder to see. We expect deception to come dressed in malice, but gaslighting wears a calm face, a kind tone, a gentle shrug. It pretends to be your friend. It says it's helping you. That's the trick. That's why you let it in. And once it's in, you stop defending the truth. You start defending your mental stability. That's the cruelest part. The paradox is that you no longer care what happened. You just want to believe you're not broken. You abandon truth not because you don't believe in it, but because you're afraid believing in it will isolate you. You give it up to stay connected. You give it up to feel safe. But now think about this. What if they believe their lies too? What if the gaslighter isn't manipulating you consciously? What if they've gaslit themselves? What if their version of reality is so deeply twisted that when they deny the truth, they're not lying? They're confused? Now the paradox deepens. You might be gaslit by someone who's also a victim. The abuser doesn't know they're doing harm. They think they're right. They think you're the one who's slipping. So who do you believe? Them, Yourself? Neither? Gaslighting exposes the instability of truth, not because truth is weak, but because our connection to it is fragile. It shows us that memory isn't solid, that confidence isn't proof, that feeling sure is no guarantee of being right. And in that fragile space,